I woke with my face pressed against something smooth and hard. For 3 seconds, I thought I had been buried alive. Then, I tried to push with my hands and found a pair of small green claws instead, which was considerably worse. I twisted, hit a wall with a tail I definitely had not owned before, and felt 2 folded wings scraping against my back. A pale line of light seeped through a crack above my nose. I shoved at it until the shell split and cold air rushed in. I rolled out of an egg and landed on my back. A reflection trembled in a pool beside me, showing emerald scales, a pale jade belly, gold slit eyes, 2 tiny hornbuds, and a white crescent-shaped scale in the center of my chest. I remembered being human. Somehow, I had been reincarnated as a dragon. I had become a dragon. A translucent message appeared in front of my face. Race, green dragon. Stage, hatchling. Level, 1. Unique trait, 100-fold evolution. Any evolutionary energy naturally earned by this body would be absorbed at 100 times the normal efficiency. Along with the words came a pulse of basic racial instinct. Green dragons grew slowly. Their hatchlings remained vulnerable for years, and true adulthood could take centuries. My trait did not promise free power. It promised to make every piece of growth I actually earned count 100 times. My name was Riven. At least that had not changed. That was the last thought he had time for. Something clicked behind him. A cave beetle, almost as large as his new body, came out from behind a broken pillar with 6 hooked legs scratching over black stone. Its shell was dark blue and glossy, and a pair of mandibles opened wide enough to close around Riven's neck. His new body reacted before his thoughts did. He jumped sideways. The jump carried him farther than expected. One wing opened by accident, caught the air, and turned a clean dodge into an uncontrolled spin. Riven struck the wall shoulder first, bounced off it, and landed in a heap. The beetle charged. So wings are not automatic. Good to know. His voice came out as a thin chirp. Riven stared at the beetle. The beetle clicked its mandibles. Riven decided the cave had heard nothing. He scrambled behind a fallen slab just before the creature crashed into it. The stone shifted. Dust poured from the ceiling. The beetle backed up and tried again, relying on the same straight rush. That gave Riven an idea. His body was new, but his mind still belonged to an ordinary adult from another life. That life had offered him no combat training, so he relied on observation instead. He remembered how unpleasant it was to run headfirst into a door, and the beetle seemed committed to learning the lesson repeatedly. He moved out from behind the slab and waited. The beetle lowered itself. Riven held his ground until the mandibles were almost on him. Then he threw himself to the side. The beetle hit the fractured edge of the slab. Stone cracked. One of its front legs slid into the gap. Riven lunged. His claws scraped uselessly across the shell. He tried again near the creature's head, found a softer joint, and dug in. The beetle thrashed hard enough to fling him across the floor. Pain flashed through his ribs. The thing tore its leg free. Riven backed toward the wall, breathing fast. His throat felt hot. At first he blamed panic, then the heat gathered behind his tongue in a tight, bitter knot. Instinct supplied the answer. He opened his mouth. A thread of pale green vapor hissed across the beetle's face. The creature recoiled. The vapor was weak enough that an adult dragon might have been embarrassed by it, but the beetle's eyes clouded. It stumbled. Riven ran forward and bit the exposed joint behind its head. His small teeth punched through. The beetle shuddered, struck the floor twice, and went still. For several moments, Riven lay across its shell, panting. Then the message appeared. Evolutionary energy acquired. 100-fold evolution applied. Level increased to 7. His body changed before he could sit up. Warmth spread from his stomach through every limb. His claws darkened and hardened. The ache in his ribs faded to a dull pressure. Colors sharpened. He could make out faint blue threads moving inside the beetle's corpse. Residual mana fading through its shell. Riven raised one claw and flexed it. So it is real. The words were still accompanied by the humiliating chirp. He cleared his throat and tried a roar. A squeak echoed through the ruined chamber. Riven slowly lowered his head. The empty cave was his only witness, and he decided it had no right to remember the sound. He ate part of the beetle because hunger arrived with the growth. The meat tasted like bitter mushrooms wrapped in leather, but the small core near its thorax held more of the blue energy his eyes had started to recognize. Eating the core produced another surge, though a smaller one. The system offered neither equipment nor a catalog of extra skills. Its entire advantage lay in how efficiently Riven's body used the growth a green dragon would naturally earn from the meal. That suited him. A complicated system would have meant complicated rules, while this one asked him to earn real growth and then multiplied the result by 100. The difficulty was finding enough growth to earn. The chamber around him had once been a nest. The realization came gradually as he explored. The walls were carved from dark granite, but large grooves marked the floor where claws much larger than Riven had walked. Melted channels ran along one side. On another, old roots had pushed through the ceiling. At the center lay the remains of a circular stone platform. Farther back, beyond a collapsed arch, stood a pair of doors tall enough for an adult dragon. Their surface was covered in worn spiral symbols. Riven could not read them. One mark had survived more clearly than the rest. 3 angular lines enclosed a circle, and beneath them were 3 carved digits. 999. Riven sat in front of the doors. He had been alive in this world for perhaps an hour, and it was already trying to give him ancient mysteries. He turned away and decided that food came first. The mysteries could wait until he was large enough to survive them. The nest contained no mother, no other egg, and no fresh tracks from anything larger than the beetle. Near the cracked outer tunnel, he found pieces of eggshell, older than his own, gray with age. A scorched groove ran across the wall, then disappeared beneath fallen stone. Someone had built or used this place long ago. Someone had also hidden his egg here. That was all Riven could prove. He refused to invent the rest. For the next 9 days, survival became a practical routine. At level 7, he could kill the smaller cave insects easily. By level 13, they gave so little energy that the system barely acknowledged them. A blind tunnel rat nearly took off the end of his tail on the 2nd day. Riven killed it, ate the mana-rich organ near its heart, and learned that angry twisting in a narrow passage was a poor substitute for footwork. On the 3rd day, he practiced moving all 4 legs in rhythm. On the 4th, he learned that opening both wings while running made him fall faster, not fly. On the 5th, he managed a glide of 6 body lengths from a low ledge and landed inside an old pile of bones. By the 7th day, he could cross the main chamber without tripping over his tail. That felt like an achievement, until he remembered he was supposed to be a dragon. The rapid growth created another problem. He was always hungry. Ordinary meat maintained his body. Mana and magical cores pushed it forward. His trait multiplied how efficiently he absorbed evolutionary energy, but it did not create matter from nothing. When his bones lengthened, he needed food. When his scales thickened, he needed minerals. When his wing muscles developed, he needed protein. Riven learned this after eating too little on the 6th day, and waking with cramps so sharp he thought something inside him had broken. He began stripping the edible parts from every magical creature he killed, and storing bones rich in mineral salts near his sleeping area. The old nest had a weak current of natural mana, enough to support him while he was small. It entered through cracks in the doors, marked 999, and spread through the stone like groundwater. There was also something else. A faint veil surrounded the nest. Riven noticed it only after his senses improved. The veil blurred his aura and bent sound near the outer tunnel. From outside, the nest felt empty. He did not know who had made it. He was grateful anyway. By the 10th day, he reached level 36. The level requirement was already climbing. Early progress had been cheap, because a hatchling's body needed little energy to improve. Every new stage demanded more. Even at 100 times efficiency, he would not reach the end by murdering cave insects. The system also refused to place convenient numbers over living enemies. His improving mana sense could tell whether another creature felt far weaker, near his own range, or dangerously above it. Exact source levels appeared only after he absorbed a core. Human appraisal tools, he would later learn, could estimate a living target without killing it. The outer passage finally opened beneath his claws just before noon. Riven pushed through loose soil and found sunlight. The world beyond the cave was green enough to make his scales look dull. Ancient trees rose higher than buildings, their trunks silver-brown beneath curtains of moss. Blue flowers clustered around black rocks. Tiny lights drifted beneath the canopy where mana condensed in warm air. In the distance, something with wings screamed once and was answered by 3 deeper calls. For the first time since hatching, there was space above his head. He spread his wings. A breeze caught the pale green membranes. He ran, jumped from a root, flapped twice, and stayed in the air for nearly 5 seconds. Then, he hit a bush. A small green face appeared between the leaves, 3 steps away. It belonged to a child with olive skin, messy auburn hair, enormous brown eyes, and pointed ears. The child held a strip of dried meat in both hands. Riven looked at the meat. The child looked at Riven. Riven looked toward the flat stone beside the cave entrance, where that strip of meat had been sitting moments earlier. Riven followed. He was still learning how to fly, but 4 legs worked perfectly well. The thief moved quickly through the undergrowth. Riven expected to catch the child within seconds, then realized the small figure knew every root and hollow in the forest. She slipped beneath branches that caught his wings, crossed a narrow gap on a fallen log, and dove through a screen of fern. Riven had to go around. By the time he reached the other side, the thief had vanished. He stopped and listened. Leaves rustled ahead. A whisper answered. Then another. Riven moved quietly toward the sound and reached the edge of a shallow ravine. There were more than 30 goblins hiding below. Most were thin. Several wore bandages made from old cloth. Their weapons were sharpened sticks, chipped knives, and 2 iron spearheads tied to wooden shafts. A pair of elderly goblins sat beneath a lean-to, while 5 children shared a clay cup of water. The auburn-haired thief was dividing Riven's meat into pieces. An older male goblin stood beside her. He was small, even for his kind, with olive skin, mustard yellow eyes, a chipped lower canine, and white hair tied into a short topknot. A faded red scarf wrapped around his neck. He looked up. His eyes met Riven's. The ravine went silent. Riven expected screaming. Instead, the older goblin slowly placed both hands on the ground and bowed. The others followed. The child kept chewing. Riven stared at them. He had no way to speak clearly yet. His voice was improving, but most sounds still emerged as growls and clicks. The instinctive mental speech associated with true dragons had not awakened. He pointed one claw at the meat. The child immediately hid the remaining strip behind her back. The older goblin hissed something at her. She reluctantly placed it on the ground. Riven walked down the slope and stopped in front of her. Up close, he could see mud on her knees and a shallow bite scar on her forearm. He took the meat. The child watched him with such open misery that Riven sighed. He tore the strip in half with his teeth and pushed one piece back. The goblins froze again. The child grabbed it and ran behind the older goblin. He bowed so low his forehead touched dirt. Riven looked at the patched shelters, the wounded adults, and the lack of stored food. These people had not chosen the ravine because they liked the view. A howl rolled through the forest. Every goblin stiffened. The older male snapped an order. Adults seized weapons. Children were pulled behind the rock face. The auburn-haired girl did not need to be told twice. Riven turned toward the sound. Another howl answered from his left. Then another from behind him. Blue shapes moved between the trees. The goblins were not the only ones being hunted. The first hound entered the ravine at a run. It stood shoulder-high to an adult goblin. Its fur was cobalt blue along the spine and nearly black around its legs, with pale sparks gathering between long fangs. Two more appeared above the ridge. Riven recognized the smell on the wind. They had been near his cave the previous night. The pack had found his new territory too. The older goblin stepped in front of the children with an iron-tipped spear. His hands were shaking. Riven moved past him. The goblin caught his breath and said something urgently. Riven could not understand the language yet, but the meaning was obvious. Do not. Riven glanced back at the wounded tribe, then at the hounds. He had been in the world 10 days. He already had thieves in his pantry and predators at his front door. It was starting to feel like property ownership. The first hound did not attack Riven. It went for the older goblin. That told him more about the pack than any system message could have. They knew which targets fought back, and they preferred the weak ones. Riven cut across its path. The hound changed direction with alarming speed. Blue sparks jumped from its teeth and snapped against Riven's foreleg. The shock made his muscles lock for half a heartbeat. The beast used that moment to slam into him. He rolled down the ravine wall. A second hound leaped after him. Riven twisted, planted both rear claws against its chest, and kicked. The beast flew sideways into a tree root. It landed badly but got up. They were stronger than the cave creatures and far better coordinated. Good. That meant they were worth something. Riven inhaled and spat a narrow stream of green vapor toward the closest one. The hound dodged before the breath reached it. The one behind him rushed in while his head was turned. A spear struck its shoulder. The older goblin had followed. His hands were no longer shaking. Riven could not thank him in words, so he used the opening. He whipped his tail across the hound's front legs, knocked it down, and bit into the base of its neck. The creature convulsed once. A third hound came over the ridge. Then a fourth. Riven heard shouting behind him as the goblins formed a rough line around their children. Their formation was poor, but fear had stopped scattering them. Two adults stabbed at the same hound, while another dragged a wounded hunter away by the collar. The pack moved in arcs, never committing all at once. Riven watched them for several exchanges. The blue sparks appeared only before a bite. The hounds could not release the shock at range. They also avoided the center of the ravine whenever he faced them directly. Something larger was waiting outside. A sharp bark came from the trees. Every hound changed direction at once. The alpha entered at a walk. It was almost twice the mass of the others. Dark blue fur rose in ridges over its shoulders, and a pale line of electricity crawled along one side of its jaw. The left ear was torn. Several old spear scars crossed its muzzle. This animal had attacked goblins before and survived. The alpha looked at Riven, then at the smaller hounds. It barked once. Two hounds moved toward the children from opposite sides. Riven understood. The alpha wanted him to choose. He sprang after the right hound. The alpha charged the moment Riven turned. That was also what he had expected. Riven planted one front claw on a smooth stone and deliberately let his rear feet skid. He dropped low instead of trying to stop. The alpha's jaws closed above his neck. Riven's tail came around with his full body weight behind it. The blow struck the old scar on the hound's muzzle. The alpha staggered. Riven launched himself upward and bit the torn ear. It was not a killing attack. It was leverage. He pulled the animal's head sideways as the older goblin drove his spear into the soft skin behind its front leg. The spear did not penetrate deeply, but the alpha roared and twisted toward the goblin. Riven released the ear and opened his mouth against the wound. Green vapor flooded directly into it. The hound jerked backward. Its lightning flared across Riven's jaw. Pain shot through his teeth and down his neck. His front legs buckled. The alpha attacked again. Riven rolled under the bite and raked both claws across its belly. His new claws were not yet strong enough to open the thick hide, but they left lines of blood. The alpha jumped away. For the first time, it hesitated. Riven's lower jaw was numb. One wing dragged slightly from the collision. He could hear two goblins crying out behind him. The hound had more combat experience than he did. It also had habits. Every time it prepared the electric bite, it shifted its weight onto the right front leg. Every time it retreated, It protected the wounded left side. Riven backed toward a fallen branch. He let one wing sag lower. The hound saw weakness. Its weight shifted right. Blue light gathered between its teeth. Riven waited until it jumped. Then he flared both wings at once. He could not truly fly yet, but he did not need to. The sudden lift carried him just high enough for the alpha to pass beneath. Riven landed on its back. The hound bucked. He dug his rear claws into the fur and drove his teeth into the old spear scar behind its shoulder. The alpha slammed sideways into a tree. Riven nearly lost consciousness from the impact. He held on. Riven inhaled against the wound. This time, the vapor that left his throat was darker. The alpha's muscles spasmed. Its front legs folded. Riven released it and rolled clear as the huge body hit the ground. The other hound stopped. For one heartbeat, the ravine contained only harsh breathing and the hiss of fading electricity. Then, the pack scattered. The goblins screamed after them, some in triumph, and some because they had apparently forgotten how close they had come to dying. Riven sat down. His jaw tingled. His ribs hurt again. The dragged wing ached where muscle had pulled. A message appeared. High-quality evolutionary energy acquired. 100-fold evolution applied. The warmth came hard enough to force him flat against the ground. His bones lengthened. The muscles around his shoulders tightened, then thickened. The horn buds above his brow rose into short, backward points. His wings expanded by almost a third, their pale mint membranes unfolding across the dirt. Level increased to 52. Riven blinked. The jump was enormous, but the next threshold still felt distant. The level curve was not linear. He could sense that now. Every stage needed far more energy than the one before it. The older goblin approached slowly. He lowered his spear, touched his own chest, and said, "Mogren." Riven watched him. The goblin pointed to himself again. Mogren. A name. Riven tapped one claw against the white crescent scale on his chest. He tried to give the name he had carried in his old life, but his new mouth fought the sound. Riven. Mogren's ears lifted. Riven. The auburn-haired child popped up behind him and pointed to herself. Tika. She had managed to keep the stolen meat through the entire battle. Riven respected the commitment. In the days that followed, communication improved faster than either side expected. Goblin speech shared enough simple sounds with the trade language used in nearby human settlements that Riven could build a vocabulary from repeated context. His dragon mind also retained patterns with uncomfortable ease. By the time his mental speech awakened 3 weeks later, he understood more of the goblins than they realized. That led to his first diplomatic problem. Mogren had told the tribe that Riven was an ancient emerald spirit, reborn in small form. Riven learned this while lying on a warm rock after lunch. His new telepathic voice entered Mogren's mind as clearly as spoken words. I am not ancient. Mogren dropped the basket he was carrying. 3 turnips rolled down the slope. The old goblin stared at Riven. Riven repeated himself. Mogren went to his knees. Within an hour, the tribe had revised Riven's title from Ancient Emerald Lord to Ancient Emerald Lord who rejects age. Riven objected again. By sunset, it had become Ancient Emerald Lord beyond the measure of years. He gave up. The arrangements between them became practical quickly. The goblins had been driven from a crude village 2 valleys east. The Blue Hounds had killed 6 adults over several months and taken most of their livestock. Mogren had moved the survivors into the ravine because the pack rarely entered the old dragon territory. Riven's hatching had changed that. His scent attracted curious predators. His first hunts had also disrupted a few feeding grounds. The tribe needed safety. Riven needed food, information, and hands capable of opening a storage jar without breaking it between claws. Mogren proposed a simple exchange. The goblins would gather edible roots, hunt small game, maintain smokehouses, and help clear the collapsed passages in the nest. They would also watch the forest and warn Riven about threats too large for them. Riven would allow them to settle around the cave and deal with magical predators that entered the surrounding valley. The agreement required neither oaths nor magical bonds, and Riven explicitly told them that worship was unnecessary. Mogren accepted all of that, then quietly kept the worship anyway. Tika became the tribe's most enthusiastic courier. She was 8, small even by goblin standards, and had a talent for appearing wherever food was unattended. Riven caught her trying to steal from his meat rack twice. The third time, she left a polished blue stone in exchange. Riven stared at it for several seconds. Tika waited nervously. He put the stone beside his sleeping place. The next morning, there were 4 more. That was how his hoard began. Riven refused to call it a hoard. It was a collection of objects that might become useful. The fact that he knew the exact position of every coin, colored stone, metal buckle, and polished shell was irrelevant. Mogren knew better than to comment. The tribe moved from the ravine to the valley below Riven's cave. Their first defenses were barely more than sharpened stakes. The goblins rebuilt old shelters with timber from dead trees and dug drainage trenches before the spring rains. Riven helped where his body allowed it. At level 70, he could drag logs that required 6 goblins to move. At level 82, his wings were strong enough for short, controlled flights. At level 91, he discovered that his venom could be concentrated into a thin stream capable of eating through the shell of larger beetles. He also discovered that growing too quickly was inconvenient. Mogren assigned 3 builders to widen the cave entrance. They measured Riven carefully. They added extra space. They finished 8 days later. Riven had gained 2 levels and several inches across the shoulders. He walked toward the new entrance with the entire work crew watching proudly. His head passed through. His front shoulders did not. Riven pushed once. Stone dust fell around his horns. He backed out. The youngest builder looked at Mogren and said, with great seriousness, "The Lord develops faster than construction." Mogren closed his eyes. Riven sent a thought to all 3 of them. "Make it larger." The builder swallowed. "How much larger?" Riven considered his recent growth. "Enough that you think it looks ridiculous. Then double that." They did. The next serious threat came on the 39th day after his hatching. The Blue Hound pack returned. This time, there were fewer adults, but they had followed a new alpha, a lean female with a silver streak down her spine. They stopped outside the valley, rather than charging. Riven walked to meet them. Mogren and 6 hunters followed at a distance. The silver-backed hound lowered her head. Riven expected a fight. Instead, 2 pups crawled from behind her. One limped. The pack had lost territory farther north. Something larger had entered their hunting range. Riven could smell fear, hunger, and the fading scent of the old alpha on them. He did not have the ability to command beasts. He had no interest in pretending otherwise. He also did not need another pointless fight. Riven killed a deer that afternoon and left half the carcass beyond the valley markers. The hounds ate and left. They returned 3 days later. Over the next month, a strange arrangement formed. The pack avoided goblin livestock and stopped approaching the children's paths. The goblins left scraps at a fixed stone outside the settlement. 2 orphaned pups eventually began sleeping near the outer watchposts. Mogren called it a sacred pact between the Emerald Lord and the Blue Fangs. Riven called it feeding animals until they stopped biting people. Both descriptions produced the same result. On the 46th day, Riven and the adult pack hunted together for the first time. A horned boar had entered the valley from the north, the same kind of mana-rich predator that had displaced the hounds. It was larger than a horse, with stone plates over its shoulders, and a tusk capable of splitting a tree trunk. At level 98, Riven was close to his first stage threshold. He did not charge the boar head-on. The hounds drove it between 2 rocky rises. Riven attacked from above, still more gliding than flying. His venom softened the exposed skin behind one plate. The boar turned toward him, leaving its rear leg open to the silver-backed alpha. She bit the tendon. The boar fell. Riven finished it through the gap in its armor. The core burned hot when he swallowed it. Level increased to 103. Stage evolution available. His body stretched with a deep ache that lasted several minutes. The pale jade scales along his belly broadened. His neck lengthened. The black tips of his horns became visible for the first time. His wings opened wider than the goblin's largest roof. The world seemed to drop away beneath him as his balance changed. A new instinct settled into place with the transformation. Telepathic speech widened. Air currents became easier to read. His venom gland expanded and connected to a reservoir beneath his throat. Riven stood when the pain passed. Mogren had to tilt his head much farther back than before. Tika walked around one foreleg and announced that Riven was now too large to steal food from unnoticed. Riven looked down at her. You consider that a problem? Tika thought about it. A challenge. Riven laughed, and this time the sound that left his chest was finally low enough to shake leaves from the nearest branch. He stopped. The goblins stared. Riven tried the roar he had failed to produce on his first day. It rolled through the valley, deep and resonant, sending birds into the sky. Mogren lifted both hands in triumph. Riven felt an embarrassing amount of satisfaction. He had spent more than a month pretending the first squeak had never happened. Now he finally sounded like what he was becoming. A young green dragon. Far beyond the valley, on a road leading toward the border barony of Riven, two human merchants heard the roar. They stopped their cart. One looked at the other. Neither had ever heard a dragon this deep inside the old forest. By the end of the week, the first rumor reached a human tavern. By the end of the month, it had become 6 different stories. In one, a green dragon had eaten 40 goblins. In another, 40 goblins had somehow trained a green dragon. The third version claimed the dragon could speak, collect tolls, and breathe poison through solid stone. The fourth said it was still a hatchling. That was the only part nobody believed. Nearly 4 months after Riven hatched, Riven stopped treating the rumors as tavern entertainment. The border barony depended on 2 roads that skirted the old forest. Timber, salt, lamp oil, and grain moved through those roads before reaching smaller settlements farther north. For years, the danger had been predictable. Merchants paid for escorts during the beast migrations. Villages rang bells when wolves crossed the tree line, and hunters posted bounties for anything large enough to take livestock. A dragon changed that calculation. A dragon that supposedly grew larger every time someone described it, changed it faster. Baron Halric did not send an army. Marching 200 soldiers into an ancient forest because of conflicting rumors was expensive, slow, and a good way to turn a cautious beast into an enemy. He sent Sir Alden Var instead. Alden was 29, tall and lean beneath polished silver plate, with steel gray eyes and dark blue-black hair cut close at the sides. A natural silver streak ran from his right temple into the rest of his hair, making him easy to pick out, even before he put on the deep blue cloak of Riven. A narrow scar under his jaw was the only decoration on an otherwise severe face. He had the useful reputation of returning with facts rather than heroic songs. Riven was not the only power interested in the forest. The Sylvan Accord sent Elira Sunleaf, a high elf ranger whose long golden hair was braided around her head like a crown. Her turquoise eyes rarely left the tree line, and her white and green travel coat carried a gold leaf clasp at the throat. She had spent years measuring changes in mana currents across the eastern woods. Those currents had begun bending toward Riven's valley. The third specialist was Nixara Vale. Nixara was a dark elf scholar from the free city of Velis, invited because old dragon ruins were involved. She had dusky violet-gray skin, bright violet eyes, and silver lilac hair pulled into a long side braid that reached her waist. A black, plum-colored coat hung over practical field clothes. Thin rune gloves covered her hands, and the staff she carried was topped by a small purple crystal that she used more often as a measuring tool than a weapon. She read dead languages for a living, and treated solemn places with the exact amount of respect needed to avoid being thrown out of them. The expedition also included 12 soldiers, 2 porters, and 6 licensed beast hunters led by Captain Rook Danner. Rook was a broad man in his 40s with a shaved head, a rust-red beard, and an old burn scar running across his left cheek. He wore dark scale leather and carried a heavy spear whose blue-etched head had been forged for penetrating magical hides. He had hunted wyverns before. He had never killed a true dragon. The distinction mattered to everyone except Rook. Alden laid out the purpose of the expedition before they entered the forest. They were to establish whether a dragon actually lived in the valley, determine its age and behavior, and withdraw if the creature proved hostile beyond their ability to contain. Rook asked, what happened if they found a valuable threat while it was still young enough to kill? Alden answered that the Baron had not authorized a hunt. Rook accepted that with a nod. Nyxara watched him for a moment, then asked Alden whether Grayfin's definition of obedience included smiling while ignoring orders. Alden said that in his experience, it usually did. Elira told both of them to lower their voices because something was tracking the group from the brush. 6 soldiers reached for weapons. A blue hound stepped onto the path. Its silver-striped back came level with Alden's waist. It looked at the column, then at Elira, then sat. A second hound appeared 50 paces ahead. Nyxara rested both hands on her staff. That is either a very polite ambush, or we have been noticed. Elira crouched and examined the first hound from a distance. There was no collar and no control rune. Its coat was healthy. A small carved wooden disc hung from a cord around its neck. The disc showed a crude green dragon head. Alden exhaled through his nose. They had definitely been noticed. The hounds guided them the rest of the way. The first sight of the valley did more to settle the rumors than any report could have. It was not a goblin war camp. It was also far beyond the miserable hiding place Alden had expected. A timber palisade enclosed the lower slope beneath an enormous cave entrance. The wall had 2 watch platforms and a gate wide enough for carts. Smoke rose from clay chimneys. Drying racks stood beside a small tannery. A stream had been diverted through a stone-lined channel to feed 3 cisterns. The buildings were rough, but placed with obvious planning, leaving clear lanes between the gate, storage houses, and shelters. Goblins worked everywhere. Some stopped when the expedition appeared. Others kept working after a quick glance toward the cave. Alden noticed the habit. They checked the cave before they checked the armed humans. Mogren came through the gate wearing his faded red scarf and carrying a staff capped with a piece of polished blue stone. Tika followed, despite his repeated gestures telling her not to. The goblin elder knew enough train speech by then to greet travelers. His first question was whether the humans had come to trade. Alden said they had come to speak with the dragon. Mogren nodded gravely. The ancient Emerald Lord beyond the measure of years is eating. Alden looked at Elira. Elira looked at Nyxara. Nyxara asked how old the ancient Emerald Lord was. Mogren considered the question. 112 days. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Rook laughed first. He told Mogren that either goblins counted badly, or somebody was enjoying a joke. Every horse in the expedition pulled at its reins. Riven descended from above the cave mouth and landed on the broad ledge beside it. At level 241, he was already larger than an ox. Emerald scales darkened toward the ridge of his back, while his underside remained pale jade. 2 swept horns curved behind his skull, their tips black. His wing membranes were a lighter mint green. The white crescent scale on his chest stood out against the rest of him, and his gold-slit eyes fixed on the visitors with uncomfortable intelligence. He folded his wings. I assume one of you is responsible for the metal spear that smells like wyvern blood. The voice entered every mind in the expedition at once. 2 soldiers flinched. Rook tightened his hand around the spear. Alden stepped forward before the hunter could answer. He introduced himself, Grayfen, and the purpose of the visit. Riven listened from the ledge. Alden expected pride from a dragon. The old chronicles agreed on very little, but they all agreed that dragons enjoyed being treated as important. Riven's first question was how much salt cost in Grayfen. Alden paused. Riven explained that the goblins had begun preserving more meat than they could smoke, and the small quantities purchased from passing traders cost too much. Mogren immediately produced a scratch slate with figures. Nyxara turned her face away, shoulders moving once. Elira noticed. I expected demands for tribute. We are discussing salt. Riven's gold eyes narrowed slightly. Tribute is less useful than salt if your winter food rots. Alden found that answer more concerning than a roar would have been. Predators took what was in front of them. Rulers thought about winter. He asked permission to perform an assessment. Riven agreed after Alden explained what the crystal measured. A soldier brought out a fist-sized prism set in brass. Alden held it toward the dragon. Light moved through the crystal. Juvenile stage, approximate level 241. Alden read it twice. Elira stepped closer and checked the runes around the brass frame. A normal green dragon at level 241 should have been decades old. A particularly fortunate one might reach it sooner, in a region rich with mana. No serious record placed one there in less than 20 years. Alden looked up. Mogren said you hatched 112 days ago. He counts correctly. Alden turned the crystal over and tested its calibration against Elira. The reading matched her known range. Nixara leaned over his shoulder. You could shake it. Elira gave her a flat look. It is a calibrated, arcane instrument. Then perhaps, politely ask it to stop lying. Riven climbed down from the ledge. The closer he came, the brighter the crystal became. Alden jerked it back a little. Assessment prisms were designed to read an aura at range. Pushing one too close to a dense magical creature could saturate the inner lattice, and this model had been issued for border beasts rather than true dragons. He began to warn Riven. The prism made a sharp sound and split down the center. Nixara lifted one eyebrow. It has chosen silence. Alden looked at the broken crystal, then at Riven. Riven looked almost apologetic. Does Grafen expect me to pay for that? Alden surprised himself by laughing. The moment helped, but it did not solve the actual question. Riven explained the rule he was willing to reveal. He said his body developed faster than other green dragons. He did not mention the exact multiplier. There was no reason to hand strangers the most important fact about him. Elira asked whether his growth drew mana from the forest itself. That question mattered. She had traced the bent mana currents to the valley and feared that Riven might be draining the region in a way that would kill old trees and force magical beasts toward human land. Riven invited her to examine the valley. The answer became clear within an hour. His rapid growth did draw heavily when he evolved, but the old nest sat over a deep natural current. The stone around the 999 doors funneled mana upward. Riven had also been hunting the largest predators that disrupted weaker territorial patterns. The local forest was changing because of him, yet it remained healthy. Some parts were even becoming more stable. Elira's posture eased for the first time. Nixara became interested in the cave immediately. Riven allowed her into the outer ruins with Alden and Elira. Rook was told to remain outside with the rest of the expedition. The captain did not argue. That worried Alden more than an argument would have. Inside, Nixara spent 20 minutes studying the worn symbols near the sealed doors. She brushed dust from the carved 999 and traced the surrounding circle with one gloved finger. She could identify fragments of the script as High Draconic, but much of it belonged to an older form. One repeated phrase referred to a crown road. Another meant lower world or lower sky, depending on context. The seal itself was dormant. Riven asked whether opening it would be wise. Nixara looked at the ancient door, then at the broken architecture surrounding it. She said wisdom was usually what scholars discovered immediately after opening something. Riven denied permission. Nixara accepted the decision with visible disappointment. Outside, Rook Danner had made a different calculation. He knew the market price of true dragon materials. A claw from an adult could pay for a house. A vial of blood could fund a hunting company for a year. A heart core from an anomalous juvenile, whose level exceeded 200 after a few months, did not have a market price, because nothing comparable had ever been sold. Rook did not intend to sell it openly. Before the expedition, he had already dealt with factors who moved illegal monster parts for collectors and alchemists. One of them had promised enough money and political protection to make a man disappear from Grafen if he ever brought back something truly unique. Rook had spent 20 years watching lords become wealthy from risks taken by men like him. He had decided long ago that if a fortune ever came close enough to touch, he would not ask permission. The outer wall of the cave carried old metal sockets half hidden beneath moss. Rook recognized them from ruin hunts. Defensive anchors. One of his men found a stone plate 50 paces below the entrance, buried under roots. A dragon head was carved into it with the mouth open. Rook waited until the expedition was eating near the gate. Then he returned with 2 hunters, who already knew he intended to leave Grayfen rich or not return at all. His plan was reckless, but complete enough to satisfy him. Activate whatever restraint system remained. If it weakened the dragon, let the ancient defense take the blame. Drive the anti-dragon spear through the chest, and cut out the heart core while Alden was dealing with the ruin. A pack horse and a narrow hunter trail on the south slope gave them a route to the western road, where the collector's factor could move the core before Grayfen sealed the border. If the plate did nothing, they would claim they had been examining the ruin. The stone plate had 4 depressions. Rook pressed mana crystals into them. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the entire valley shook. Riven felt the pulse beneath his claws while speaking with Mogren near the smokehouse. His head snapped toward the cave. Every old rune along the entrance lit green. Nixara came running out. Who touched something? A deep crack answered her. The ground behind the expedition split open. Roots, the thickness of tree trunks, tore free from the soil. Stone rose with them, assembling around a central body buried under the hill. 2 enormous arms unfolded. A head shaped like a dragon skull emerged from dirt and moss, its eye sockets burning with green light. The thing stood more than 30 feet tall. Nixara looked at Riven. For the record, this one was not me. The stone guardian swung one arm through the palisade. Riven was already moving. He hit the guardian's wrist in flight, claws screeching across old stone. The impact turned the blow just enough to miss the nearest houses. The force still threw him across the yard. He twisted in the air and landed on all 4 feet. The guardian's surface was covered in roots and carved armor plates. He inhaled and fired his concentrated venom at the knee joint. Green liquid hissed against stone. The outer layer smoked. The guardian kept walking. Riven's eyes narrowed. This was not going to be one of the easy kills. Alden drew his sword and began shouting orders. Soldiers pulled goblin civilians away from the broken wall. Elira climbed a watch platform for elevation. Nixara ran toward the glowing sockets near the cave, reading symbols while moving. Rook emerged from behind the stone plate with his spear. Alden saw him. Understanding reached his face before anger did. What did you activate? Rook answered that it was supposed to be a restraint. Nixara shouted from across the yard that he had activated a gate guardian. Rook asked how he was supposed to know that. Nixara replied that this was why literate people had been invited. The guardian opened its jaw. Mana gathered inside. Elira saw it first. She shouted for everyone to get down. A green beam tore across the settlement. Riven dove into its path and folded his wings around 2 goblin children who had frozen near a water trough. Pain burned through his scales. The attack did not break his armor, but the heat drove him to one knee. Tika grabbed both children and dragged them behind the trough. Riven looked at the smoking line across his shoulder. Then he looked at the guardian. The fight had just become personal. He launched upward. The guardian swung for him. Riven climbed over the first fist, rolled around the second, and raked the glowing eye socket as he passed. His claws tore roots but found solid stone beneath. The guardian turned faster than its size suggested. A root whip snapped from its shoulder and caught Riven around one rear leg. It slammed him into the ground. Air left his lungs. The guardian raised one foot. Alden's sword struck the root around Riven's leg. The steel barely cut it. Elira's arrow hit the same place an instant later, carrying a burst of cutting wind. The root split. Riven rolled away as the stone foot hit the ground. He rose with dirt across his face and blood at one nostril. Alden looked very small beside the Guardian. Riven sent a thought directly to him. That was useful. Alden parried a whipping root and answered through clenched teeth that he appreciated the detailed praise. Nyxara was not fighting the body. She had reached the old plate. Rook activated and was tracing the glowing channels with her staff. The Guardian was receiving mana from 4 buried anchors. Each anchor fed a different part of the construct. Breaking the body would accomplish little, while the channels remained active. She shouted the pattern to Elira. The High Elf turned toward the nearest exposed runestone and fired. Her arrow carried a compressed spiral of air. It struck one depression and shattered the mana crystal Rook had inserted. The Guardian's left arm slowed. Riven understood immediately. Break the anchors. I will keep it looking at me. This time, he did not attack the armor. He attacked attention. He flew directly past the Guardian's face, close enough for its jaws to snap at his tail. He spat venom into one glowing eye, banked hard, and struck the back of its skull with both rear claws. The Guardian turned, exactly as he wanted. Its next beam chased him away from the settlement. Riven flew low between trees, using trunks to force the construct to adjust its aim. The beam carved through bark behind him. The Guardian followed, dragging roots from the ground. Alden and Elira destroyed the second anchor. Nyxara used a counter rune on the third. The construct's right leg locked for half a second. Riven came around from behind and hit the joint with his venom stream. This time, the damaged stone cracked. The Guardian dropped to one knee. Rook watched from the edge of the yard. The plan had failed. Alden knew what he had done. If the dragon survived, Rook would leave Grayfin in chains. His eyes moved to Riven. The young dragon was facing away, focused on the Guardian. Rook tightened both hands on the anti-dragon spear. He ran. Tikka saw him before anyone else. She screamed. Riven turned his head. Rook drove the spear forward at the pale crescent scale on his chest. Alden hit Rook from the side. The spear point scraped across Riven's shoulder instead of entering his heart. Blue runes flared. The weapon pierced 2 scales and lodged shallowly in flesh. Riven roared. His tail swept Rook off his feet. The captain hit the ground hard enough to lose the spear. Alden put a boot on his wrist and the point of his sword under his chin. Riven did not have time to deal with him. The Guardian was rising again. Nyxara shouted that one anchor remained. It was beneath the Guardian itself. Riven ripped the spear from his shoulder with his teeth and spat it into the dirt. The wound burned from the anti-dragon enchantment. He looked at the cracked knee, the slowed arm, and the pulsing lines of light running from the ground into the construct's chest. Then he saw the rhythm. Every time the Guardian fired its beam, the chest plates opened slightly to vent mana. Riven climbed higher than he had ever flown. The Guardian tracked him. Green light gathered in its mouth. Riven folded his wings and dropped. The beam followed. At the last moment, he opened one wing, turned his fall sideways, and passed the Guardian's head by inches. Its own beam struck the earth between its feet. The ground exploded. The final anchor was exposed in the crater. Nyxara drove her staff into the glowing crystal. Purple light flashed. The anchor shattered. The Guardian froze. Its chest plates opened. Riven was already there. He landed on the construct's shoulder, dug in with all 4 claws, and pushed his jaws between the plates. The core inside was a knot of green crystal, wrapped in roots. He released every drop of venom his expanded gland could produce. The core hissed. Cracks raced across it. The Guardian's arms jerked once. Riven bit down. Crystal broke between his teeth. The giant collapsed. Riven jumped clear a stone, and dead roots crashed across the ruined yard. The beam vanished with it. The runes on the cave went dark, and only then did Riven hear somebody crying near the gate. Riven stood beside the fallen construct, breathing hard. The wound from Rook's spear throbbed. One wing membrane had torn near the edge. Dust covered his scales. A warm pulse began deep inside him. The Guardian's shattered core was releasing evolutionary energy directly into the old nest current. Riven's body drank it in. Hundredfold evolution applied. Level increased to 327. The black-tipped horns swept farther behind his skull. New scales formed over the spear wound as the anti-dragon residue burned away. His wings expanded until their shadow covered half the yard. He had crossed another racial threshold. Young dragon stage achieved. Alden stared. Elira lowered her bow. Nixara's hand stopped halfway to the notebook at her belt, violet eyes fixed on the widening shadow of Riven's wings. They had arrived expecting a dangerous juvenile. They had just watched him become something that should have required decades of growth. Riven looked down at Rook. The hunter captain was still pinned beneath Alden's boot. His two accomplices had been disarmed near the activation plate, and now sat bound under guard, with mud on their knees, and none of Rook's confidence left. Rook's face had gone pale. Riven's mental voice entered only his mind this time. "You tried to kill me in my own home." Riven glanced toward the broken palisade, the injured goblins, and the crater where the Guardian had stood. "Grayfen can have you. If you return here, I will." Alden understood the unfinished sentence perfectly. Rook and the two hunters were bound before sunset. No one argued. The expedition stayed for 4 more days. Alden wanted the wounded treated before returning to Grayfen, and Elira refused to leave until she knew the Guardian's activation had not damaged the deeper mana current. Nixara used the excuse to spend every waking hour inside the ruined nest. Riven used the same 4 days to decide what the visitors had changed. The answer was more than he liked. Until then, his valley had existed because stronger creatures had not cared enough to contest it. The goblins were invisible to human politics. The hounds were ordinary predators. Riven himself had been hidden by an ancient veil and dismissed as a rumor. The period of anonymity had ended. Grayfen now knew his approximate strength. The Sylvan Accord knew his growth was unnatural. Rook Danner had proved that valuable people attracted greed as reliably as blood attracted flies. Riven could not make the world forget him. He could make it expensive to treat his home carelessly. Alden understood the same problem from the opposite direction. On the morning of his departure, he met Riven on the ridge above the settlement. The knight had removed his armor and wore a dark blue tunic beneath his cloak. A bandage wrapped one forearm where a root had cut through a vambrace. He brought paper. Riven found that promising. Alden proposed a provisional agreement. Grayfen would recognize the valley as outside normal hunting licenses and would forbid bounty hunters from entering it without permission. In return, Riven would keep the forest road open, avoid attacking Grayfen's settlements, and notify the barony if large magical beasts migrated toward the border. Riven asked what Grayfen gained besides not being attacked by him. Alden said safer roads, lower escort costs, and access to goblin smoked meat if the smell coming from Mogren's new smokehouse meant what he thought it did. Riven appreciated the honesty. He added a salt clause. Alden read it twice. "You are negotiating a territorial agreement over salt. Your merchants are charging 7 copper marks per sack. 4 in town. 7 here. Transport. 3 marks for 1 cart ride is robbery with wheels." He admitted that the valley had been buying in small lots from opportunistic middlemen and agreed to ask the Baron for a fixed bulk caravan rate of 5 copper marks. That was how the first treaty of Riven's new life was shaped partly by dragon politics and partly by meat preservation. Elira's arrangement took longer. She had spent 3 days measuring the valley and another half-day arguing with Nixara about whether scholarly curiosity counted as a reason to place chalk marks on an active seal. Her final report was cautious. Riven's presence concentrated mana around the old nest during periods of evolution, but the surrounding forest recovered quickly. Large predators had become less aggressive near the road because several dominant beasts were dead or had moved away. She proposed remaining in the valley for 1 season as an observer for the Sylvan Accord. Riven asked whether that meant she intended to inspect everything he ate. Elira said only if he started consuming sacred trees. Riven promised to limit himself to things that tried to eat him first. Nixara asked for permission to remain as well. She pointed at the sealed 999 doors. Riven told her she could study them as long as she did not activate anything. Nixara placed one hand over her heart and gave a solemn promise. Elira asked whether she meant it. Nixara said she meant the important part, which was that she personally would not activate anything. Riven added that nobody working for her, helping her, following her instructions, or standing nearby holding a crystal was allowed to activate anything either. Nixara sighed and said he was learning too quickly. She had no idea how accurate that statement was. Rook Danner's trial took place in Riven 2 weeks later. Alden sent a copy of the judgment to the valley. Rook lost his hunting license. His company assets were seized to compensate the injured, and he was sentenced to labor on the northern fortifications. The 2 hunters who had helped him activate the Guardian lost their licenses as well. Both gave testimony about the planned escape route and received shorter sentences for cooperating. Several noble collectors quietly tried to buy Rook's anti-dragon spear before the trial was over. Alden made sure the weapon went into Grafen's sealed armory instead. That mattered to Riven. People who kept agreements were more useful than people who made grand speeches. By his 4th month, merchants began approaching the valley deliberately. At first, they came in pairs, with nervous guards and carts light enough to turn around quickly. They brought salt, iron nails, cloth, lamp oil, grain, and cheap pottery. In exchange, the goblins sold smoked game, medicinal mushrooms, resin, blue hound shed fur, and herbs gathered from parts of the forest human foragers rarely reached. The goblins also cleared 2 small terraces on the western side of the valley for barley, turnips, and hardy beans. The plots could not feed the settlement by themselves, but they reduced the amount of grain that had to arrive by road. Riven did not become a merchant prince. He did notice that a stable road and a few reliable fields could feed more people than another pile of monster corpses. Mogren handled most trade, because Riven's idea of bargaining tended to become unfair the moment he stood over someone large enough to swallow their horse. He also kept the settlement treasury separate from Riven's personal hoard. Road income, food purchases, tools, and repairs went through a communal iron-banded chest and a slate ledger. Riven's own share, from hides, cores, and goods he personally provided, went into the stone chest beside the rear wall. The first merchant who tried to negotiate with Riven spent the entire conversation staring at his teeth. Mogren later informed Riven that the man had agreed to a terrible price simply to leave alive. Riven sent back part of the payment. Mogren looked physically pained. Lord, he offered it. He thought I would eat him. A bargaining advantage. A bad one. Mogren stared at the returned silver. Then he asked whether Riven wanted to become poor on purpose. Riven told him there were 43 silver pieces in his personal chest. Mogren blinked. There were 42 yesterday. Riven's head turned toward him. Mogren smiled slowly. Riven narrowed his eyes. The goblin elder burst out laughing. Riven had walked directly into the trap. He spent the rest of the afternoon insisting that awareness of exact inventory did not count as dragon greed. Nobody believed him. The forest south of the valley was too weak to feed his growth now. Magical boars, hounds, and giant insects still provided food, but little evolutionary energy. Riven had to range farther north, where the terrain rose into wetlands and broken stone hills saturated with mana. He learned to fly properly there. At first, flight had meant surviving the air. He beat his wings too often, wasted strength in climbs, and turned with his entire body instead of using the tail and wingtips to control direction. Elira corrected some of that by watching him from the ground. She knew nothing about dragonflight, but she knew birds. Riven knew enough to steal useful principles. He practiced climbing on warm rising air instead of fighting gravity. He folded the inner edge of one wing during turns. He learned that his tail was not simply a weapon, but a counterweight. His human mind made him willing to repeat awkward exercises that a young dragon driven by instinct might abandon once it could stay airborne. Nixara watched one afternoon from a rock. and asked whether dragons normally practice landing the same way 20 times. Riven answered that dragons normally took 20 years to reach his size, so he was operating without a reliable manual. On his 21st landing, he put both feet exactly where he intended. On the 22nd, a gust caught him and he knocked over Nixara's equipment table. She stared at a shattered bottle of purple ink. Riven stared at it too. That was the wind. The wind has emerald scales? Local weather is unusual. Nixara made him pay for the ink. At 5 months, Riven could cross the distance to Grayfen in less than an hour. At 6, his concentrated venom could burn through the armored shell of a marsh crawler. At 7, he learned to loosen the muscles around his venom reservoir and release the breath as a broad cloud instead of a narrow stream. The cloud was weaker at any single point, but it lingered between trees and forced fast enemies to abandon an area. That technique saved a caravan near the western road. A pack of red-backed forest hats had surrounded 6 wagons during a storm. By the time Riven arrived, guards had formed a ring around the horses while the cats moved through the rain beyond torchlight. The beasts felt barely level 70 by aura. Riven was level 558. He landed on the road, opened his jaws, and pushed a low green fog across the tree line. 2 cats collapsed before reaching the ditch. The others fled. Riven ate 1 mana core because wasting it offended him, and told the merchants to stop staring. One of them looked from the dead cat to Riven, and asked whether that was the entire fight. Riven glanced at the shallow claw marks the beast had left in the mud. They were not strong enough to make it longer. The merchant bowed so hard he nearly fell into the ditch. The wagons were moving again before the guards had finished calming the horses. The more difficult hunt came near the end of his 8th month. Elira found the tracks first. Trees along a ridge had been scraped 20 feet above the ground. Pools of water had turned yellow. 3 smaller predators had abandoned their dens in the same week. A Mirehorn Titan had moved into the northern wetlands. The creature resembled a 6-legged rhinoceros, covered in overlapping bark-like armor. Its head carried a forked horn that absorbed mana from the ground and released it in heavy shockwaves. An adult could challenge a young dragon. Riven wanted the core. Elira wanted the Titan gone because its feeding was draining a spring used by 2 elven settlements downstream. Their goals aligned. Riven found the Titan at dusk, in a basin of black water. It was larger than he expected. The back rose nearly to his chest. Roots and algae hung from its armor. Each step pressed water out of the mud in wide circles. Riven attacked from above with a concentrated stream of venom. The bark plates smoked. The Titan lowered its horn. Mana pulsed through the marsh. Riven felt the pressure 1 instant before the shockwave hit. Air folded around him. He was thrown across the basin and clipped a dead tree hard enough to split it. The Titan charged through the water. Riven climbed before the horn reached him. The second shockwave missed, but tore branches from nearby trees. He had found the problem. The Titan controlled the ground beneath the entire basin. Staying low gave it an advantage. Staying high gave Riven room, but its armor protected the spine. He circled. The Titan followed, keeping its horn pointed toward him. Riven fired 3 short venom bursts at different plates. The Titan ignored them. He stopped trying to penetrate the armor. Instead, he aimed at the water. Green venom spread across the surface in a thin film. The Titan snorted and moved away from it. Riven repeated the attack from the opposite side. The creature shifted again. He began hurting it. Each cloud of venom denied a section of marsh. The Titan had to move toward the rocky rim where its ground magic weakened. It realized too late. The moment its front feet reached stone, the next shockwave lost half its force. Riven flew through it. The pressure bruised his chest, but he kept moving. He landed on the Titan's back and drove both rear claws beneath the edge of a bark plate softened by earlier venom. The Titan bucked. Riven ripped upward. The plate tore free. Pale flesh showed beneath. The Titan rolled. Riven launched away an instant before several tons of armored body crushed the place where he had stood. He banked, came around, and released his concentrated venom directly into the opening. The Titan screamed. Its next shockwave went wild. Riven landed in front of it. As the creature staggered, he caught the forked horn between his foreclaws, turned his body with the charge, and forced the head sideways. The movement opened the damaged shoulder. His jaws closed on the exposed tissue. He bit until he felt the core cavity crack beneath his teeth. The Titan collapsed into the shallows. Riven stood over it, breathing hard, with a bruise spreading across his chest where the first shockwave had thrown him. He looked back at the poison-coated marsh and the strip of rock where the Titan had finally lost its advantage. If he had kept trading strength for strength in deep mud, the armor and shockwaves would have cost him far more. Moving the fight onto ground of his choosing had decided it. The core was the size of a melon. Riven brought it back to the valley rather than eating it in the marsh. Evolution at higher levels demanded enough food and mineral reserves that transforming far from home was becoming foolish. Mogren had already prepared for that. The goblins had spent weeks stockpiling smoked meat, salt blocks, and ground shell mineral after Riven's last major growth spurt emptied 3 stores in one night. When Riven consumed the Mirehorn core, the valley's mana shifted visibly. Leaves turned toward the cave. Blue light rose from the stream. The old veil around the nest trembled. Level increased to 603. Adult dragon stage achieved. Riven's body expanded until his shoulders were higher than the gatehouse roof. His neck lengthened and became heavier with muscle. The pale mint membranes of his wings spread over the lower yard. The black tips on his swept horns deepened until they looked like polished obsidian. The white crescent scale on his chest remained exactly where it had been since hatching, now broad enough for Tika to sit on. She attempted this once. Riven lifted his head and asked what she was doing. Tika said she was checking whether the sacred crescent was comfortable. Riven told her to check from the ground. The transformation lasted less than an hour. Its consequence traveled much farther. The ancient veil surrounding the nest cracked. For 8 months it had hidden a growing spark. Now, that spark had become an adult dragon's aura. The veil could no longer blur it. Mana rolled outward through the forest like a silent bell. Elira felt it from the watchtower. Nixara stopped riding inside the ruins and looked up. Alden, riding on the Greyfen Road 20 miles away, felt his horse shiver beneath him. Hundreds of miles to the west, in a volcanic fortress built into a red cliff, an enormous dragon opened his copper eyes. Corvath had ruled the western marches for 417 years. His wine-red scales were crossed by old scars, and 2 heavy black horns swept backward from a broad skull. Heat shimmered around his nostrils even while he rested. He recognized the aura immediately. A green dragon had reached adulthood inside territory that paid tribute to him. Corvath lifted his head from a bed of dark coins. He called for the map keeper. The lower western forest had not held an adult dragon last season. Corvath disliked surprises. Corvath arrived 4 days later. The valley knew he was coming, long before anyone saw him. Birds vanished first. The blue hounds abandoned the western ridge and returned with their ears flat. By midday, a dry heat settled over the trees, despite the cool wind. Elira walked outside, touched one palm to the ground, and immediately ordered the goblin water crews to fill every barrel. Riven climbed to the highest ridge. A red shape crossed the clouds. Corvath descended slowly, making no effort to hide his size or strength. He was nearly 30 paces from nose to tail, far broader than Riven, with wine-red scales layered like forged plates. Old pale scars crossed his muzzle and right shoulder. His black horns swept behind his skull, and his copper eyes had the calm certainty of a creature that had watched generations of humans grow old beneath the same mountain. He landed outside the palisade. The earth cracked under his weight. Riven came down on the opposite side of the open field. He had expected fear. What he felt was closer to pressure. Corvath's aura pressed against the forest until every instinct in Riven's new body understood a simple fact. This was an older dragon, a stronger dragon, a creature that his race had evolved to recognize as dangerous, before thought became involved. Riven kept walking. Korvath's gaze moved over the palisade, the goblin watchtowers, Illyra standing beside the gate, and Alden's blue-cloaked riders near the road. Then he looked back at Riven. "You have made a busy den." His telepathic voice felt heavier than Riven's, carrying the rough edge of heat. Riven stopped 30 paces away. "It keeps me from getting bored." Korvath studied him. "You know who I am? Warden of the Western Marches, collector of tribute from the Dragon territories between the Red Cliffs and the Alaris River." Nyxera had found the name in 3 different human records. One called him a tyrant. One called him protector of the western sky. The third was a merchant ledger complaining about the cost of shipping silver through his territory. Riven trusted the ledger most. She had also found the old custom behind the title. A dragon march was not a human border. It was a hierarchy laid over the map, binding dragon dens, tribute rights, and a few western trade houses that had chosen to deal with those dragons. Korvath's claim over another dragon did not automatically make Greifen citizens or Sylvan land his property. Korvath's eyes narrowed slightly. It was simple on paper. Under the old March Compact, a dragon who reached adulthood in an established den could declare a holding inside a warden's march. The warden could demand tribute. The claimant could accept, leave, or refuse. If the claimant refused, formal hostility began at the next annual tribute frost. Before that date, the warden could test the claimant's strength and enforce old passage customs. But killing the claimant inside a lawful test would void the claim and give other tribute-paying dragons grounds to reject the warden's authority. Korvath had ruled for centuries by presenting his power as law as well as force. He could bend the custom. Breaking it in front of Greifen and Sylvan witnesses would cost him more than one young den. His actual demands were still severe. Korvath wanted a portion of treasure, several high-grade cores, and military service if he called for it. Riven's settlement created additional obligations. Korvath wanted 1/3 of all trade passing through the valley. He wanted the right to take laborers from the goblin population for his cliff mines. He wanted formal recognition as Riven's overlord. Mogren stood inside the gate, listening through Riven's translated thoughts. At the mention of the mines, his fingers tightened around his blue-capped staff. Riven noticed. He had already decided his answer before Korvath finished. No. The word entered the field cleanly. Alden shifted one hand closer to his sword. Illyra's eyes stayed on Korvath's wings. Korvath looked almost amused. Young dragons often confuse possession with sovereignty. I cleared the valley. My people built the walls. Greifen recognizes the road agreement. The Sylvan Accord recognizes the forest boundary. You have not done anything here, except arrive and ask for 1/3 of the income. Korvath's claws pressed into the soil. Heat rippled around them. Humans do not grant dragons land. Elves do not grant dragons land. Good. Then their recognition should not bother you. Nyxera covered her mouth with one hand near the gate. Illyra elbowed her before the laugh escaped. Korvath ignored them. His attention sharpened on Riven. How old are you? Riven considered lying. Then he decided the truth might be more useful. 8 months and 11 days. Korvath stopped moving. The amusement left his face. Riven did. Heat rolled off the older dragon in a hard wave. He looked at Riven's wings, chest, and horns as if measuring them again. Then his claws opened. If you refuse my claim, prove you can hold your den. The challenge was legal under the March Compact. Korvath moved before anyone else could react. One moment, he stood across the field. The next, his right foreclaw came down toward Riven's neck. He pushed sideways before the strike landed. Korvath's claw tore 4 trenches through the ground. Riven beat his wings once and rose. The first exchange lasted less than 10 seconds. It taught Riven more than a week of training. Korvath turned in the air with frightening precision. He used short wing beats, conserving movement, and kept his heavier body between Riven and open sky. A sweep of his tail forced Riven downward. A second claw strike clipped Riven's flank and tore 2 scales free. Riven answered with a concentrated venom stream aimed at Korvath's eyes. The red dragon tilted his head. Most of the venom missed. A thin line touched the edge of an old scar near his jaw. Smoke rose. Korvath's expression changed again. Riven dropped toward the trees before the counterattack. Fire filled the space behind him. He folded one wing, rolled beneath a burning arc, and disappeared between the largest trunks where Korvath's greater wingspan became a disadvantage. Korvath did not chase into the canopy. He hovered above it. Riven landed on a high branch and looked up. He knew exactly how the exchange had gone. Korvath was better in the air, stronger in raw power, faster in short bursts, and experienced enough to read ordinary dragon movement before Riven finished making it. Riven had landed one minor hit because Korvath had expected a frightened juvenile. That would not happen twice. Korvath knew something too. An 8-month-old green dragon had survived 3 submission strikes that should have put an ordinary young claimant on the ground, and had burned a line into his face. The old custom allowed a warden to test a claimant. It did not allow him to turn the test into an execution after the claimant had broken contact. The witnesses now mattered more than their weapons. Alden represented Grafen. Elira represented the Sylvan Accord. Nixara knew enough old law to identify a violation. If Korvath killed Riven here, tribute dragons farther west could use the broken compact as an excuse to stop paying him. A large forest fire would create a separate dispute with the elves. Korvath had arrived expecting a routine submission, not a political mess worth starting over one den. He had also come alone. The situation had become something Korvath needed to prepare for, rather than solve with one display of force. He touched his tongue to the venom mark on his jaw and tasted it. You learn quickly. Riven's ribs hurt where the claw had clipped him. I have been told. Korvath looked toward the valley one last time. Your refusal is recorded. Tribute is due at the next tribute frost. When that date arrives, you will either submit or be treated as a hostile claimant inside my march. Riven answered that a different date would not improve the offer. Korvath spread his wings. Before taking off, he sent one final thought. 8 months old. There was no amusement in it now. He left. The moment his aura faded, Mogren sat down on a barrel. Alden sheathed his sword and asked whether Riven had planned to provoke a dragon more than 3 centuries older than any living person in the valley. Riven looked at the bloody lines on his flank. I planned to refuse him. The rest developed naturally. Nixara walked over and inspected the cuts. A comforting doctrine for regional policy. Elira told her to fetch the healing resin. Riven returned to the cave, while the goblins repaired the claw marks in the field. He had won nothing in that exchange, except information. The information was valuable. At level 603, he could survive a few moments against Korvath. He could not defeat him. That needed to change before the tribute frost. Nixara checked 3 old calendars and confirmed what the phrase meant. It was a fixed annual date in the Western Dragon Marches, not the next cold night in the valley. Because Riven had reached adulthood after the current tribute cycle, the next legal deadline lay a little under 10 months away. Korvath had not given him mercy. He was following the same compact that made his other dragons pay. The valley treated those months as borrowed working time. Riven did not panic and order a fortress built in a week. Timber still required cutting. Stone still required quarrying. People still needed food while they worked. Mogren turned the settlement's rough records into an actual inventory. They had enough grain for 4 months if trade continued, 2.5 if refugees arrived, and less if the road closed. Salt reserves were strong. Iron was the problem. Grafen had supplied nails, tools, and spearheads in small quantities, but the settlement could not arm everyone from local ore. Alden returned to the Baron with a written report. Baron Halric rejected any suggestion that Korvath's draconic march gave him authority over Grafen citizens, but he also refused to declare a human war over a dispute between 2 dragon claimants. Instead, he expanded the road treaty. Grafen would sell iron at fixed rates and allow road wardens, engineers, and private volunteers to aid the valley. The regular army would remain on Grafen soil unless Grafen's protected road or citizens were attacked. Riven found the boundary reasonable. Elira's message to the Sylvan Accord produced a similar result. The elves would defend their own forest from fire or invasive beasts. They would not place an army under Riven. The Accord also extended Elira's observation mandate through the Tribute Frost, because Korvath's pressure now threatened the same mana network she had been assigned to monitor. Riven did not need an army handed to him. He needed each ally to protect the part of the problem that was actually theirs. Korvath began with pressure rather than flame. 2 merchant caravans turned back after receiving warnings from hired riders that the Dragon Road was unsafe. Then, a group of ogres occupied the North Quarry used by goblin stonecutters. Riven flew there personally. There were 11 ogres. Their leader felt roughly level 120 by aura. Riven was level 617. The leader raised a stone club and started a speech about the territory belonging to Korvath. Riven landed in front of him and struck once with the back of one claw. The ogre crossed 20 feet of quarry and hit a wall. The club fell from his hand. The other 10 stared at Riven. Riven asked whether anyone else had prepared a speech. They left. The entire conflict took under a minute. He did not chase them. Korvath was testing responses and wasting Riven's time. There was no reason to provide a dramatic battle where strength made one unnecessary. The next move was smarter. A group of human mercenaries cut the bridge on the Grafen Road during a rainstorm, then spread word that goblins had done it. Alden arrived with road engineers before the rumor could become policy. Tikka and 2 blue hounds found the mercenaries' camp by scenting the tar used on their boots. Grafen road wardens arrested 4. 2 escaped west. 1 carried a red copper token stamped with Korvath's mark. The attack changed Halrich's legal position. Sabotage against the protected trade corridor counted as an attack on Grafen's own road agreement, which meant Grafen guards could now defend that corridor all the way to the Valley Gate without entering Korvath's dragon dispute as an army. The Red Dragon did not care whether the valley starved, lost trade, or became hated by its neighbors. He intended to make independence more expensive than tribute. Riven answered with visibility. He began escorting caravans personally twice each week. Merchants stopped turning back when an adult green dragon flew above their wagons. Trade recovered. Grafen's road toll revenue actually rose because curious travelers started coming to see the dragon settlement from a safe distance. Mogren responded by charging visitors 1 copper mark to use the viewing platform outside the palisade. Riven found out after 3 weeks. "You are charging people to stare at me?" Mogren looked offended by the wording. "We charge them to stand on the platform while staring at you. The platform required timber." Riven had no immediate answer. Mogren added that the money paid for 2 new water pumps. Riven allowed the platform to remain. He also prohibited signs advertising scheduled dragon appearances. Mogren had already painted one. Tikka hid it in the smokehouse. While the valley stabilized, Riven hunted. He needed strength before Korvath returned, and the ordinary forest could no longer provide it. Nixara located 3 old maps showing high mana territories north of the wetlands. Elira added current migration patterns. Together they identified a chain of dangerous habitats where Riven could seek strong cores without driving predators toward villages. His first target was a storm rock, nesting on the broken peaks. The bird had a wingspan nearly equal to his, and could accelerate with bursts of lightning-charged air. It was not stronger than Korvath. It was exactly the sort of opponent that could teach Riven how to survive one. The broken peaks began 4 hours north of the valley by wing. Riven reached them near noon. Gray mountains rose from the forest in narrow blades, their upper slopes stripped bare by constant wind. Clouds dragged across the highest ridges. Lightning flickered inside them, even though no rain fell below. The storm rock had chosen the tallest needle of rock for its nest. Riven saw the bird before it saw him. Its feathers were dark silver along the body and white at the tips, with blue light moving beneath them in pulses. A hooked beak opened around a cry sharp enough to hurt his ears. The creature pushed away from the peak, and the air burst behind it. Riven barely moved his head in time. The rock passed close enough for one talon to score his cheek scales. It climbed again almost vertically. Riven followed. That was his first mistake. The bird was built for this air. Its wings narrowed near the tips, and each lightning burst accelerated it, without requiring another stroke. Riven's body was stronger, but his larger membranes caught the crosswinds. Every hard correction cost momentum. The rock turned around a stone needle. Riven tried to follow the same line. The bird reversed direction halfway through the turn. Its talons hit him across the shoulder. Riven spun out, struck a cliff with one wing, and lost 30 feet before recovering. The rock screamed above him. He could almost hear contempt in it. Riven climbed more slowly. Chasing had failed twice. He stopped chasing. The rock came down again, expecting the same contest. Riven held position beside a tall rock pillar and waited until the bird committed to the dive. At the last moment, he opened his jaws and filled the gap beside the pillar with a wide venom cloud. The rock rolled away. It avoided the poison easily. It also lost the clean line of attack. Riven learned something. He repeated the tactic at the next pillar, then a third. The rock became impatient. It climbed into the cloud layer and vanished. Riven listened. Wind battered the ridge. Pebbles moved beneath his claws. Somewhere inside the cloud, a low crack of electricity sounded to his right. He looked right. Nothing. The attack came from the left. The rock had discharged into the cloud to create a false sound. Its talons struck Riven's side before he fully turned. This time, he let the impact carry him. Instead of fighting to stabilize, he folded both wings and dropped around the rock's path. His tail hooked beneath one of the bird's legs. For a fraction of a second, they were connected. Riven pulled. The rock lost its angle. Both creatures fell between two stone spires. The bird flared its wings first. Riven had expected that. He released the leg and fired his narrow venom stream into the open feathers beneath its right wing. The rock shrieked. The poison did not burn through instantly. It soaked between feathers and irritated the thin skin beneath. The bird's next lightning burst came unevenly. Riven climbed above it. Now he had the advantage of height. The rock tried to dive toward the valley between peaks, where it could build speed. Riven used the warm air rising from the sunlit rock to climb without wasting strength, then folded into a steeper dive. His heavier body accelerated. For once, he was faster. The rock twisted. Riven did not follow the twist with his entire body. He adjusted one wingtip, shifted his tail, and cut across the line instead. The practice with Elira finally became instinct. He struck the rock from above. His claws closed around the base of both wings. The bird discharged every spark it had. Lightning crawled across Riven's scales. His muscles clenched. The smell of burned hide filled his nose. He held on. Riven bit through the thick muscle at the base of its neck. The lightning stopped. They dropped another 100 feet before Riven released the body and opened his wings. He landed hard on a ledge. For almost a minute, he did nothing except breathe. His cheek bled. 3 talon cuts crossed his side. One wing joint felt as if someone had hammered a nail into it. He was smiling anyway. The rock had been level 712. It was the first creature he had fought in months that could punish every careless movement. Its core increased him to level 671. The number was less impressive than the lesson. Riven spent 2 days on the peaks before flying home. He repeated the turns that had saved him until his injured wing complained. He practiced folding into dives and recovering with less wasted motion. By the time the valley came into view, the corrections had become part of how he flew. Korvath had centuries of experience. Riven could not manufacture centuries. He could practice with purpose. That became the pattern of the next 6 months. He did not attack every high-level creature on Nixara's maps. He chose them for what they forced him to improve. A basalt manticore in the western ravines taught him to read attacks by shoulder movement, because its scorpion tail struck faster than its head. Once he understood the tell, the fight ended with one clean bite through the neck. A colony of glass wing bats taught him that a broad poison cloud could control space better than raw damage. Their bodies reflected direct magical attacks, but the cloud forced them into narrow exits, where Riven killed the largest ones in seconds. A river serpent, nearly twice his length, taught him the value of attacking from land, instead of honoring an opponent's preferred terrain. Riven baited it into shallow water, pinned the head with one foreclaw, and ended the fight before it could coil. There were easier battles too. A group of troll raiders tried to take a Grafen wagon after mistaking Riven's distant silhouette for a wyvern. He landed behind them. The lead troll turned, looked up at him, and slowly lowered his axe. Riven asked whether they intended to continue. The troll shook his head. Riven pointed toward the forest. They ran. Alden later said that Grafen's merchants had begun adding a small painted green crescent to wagon covers because raiders associated the mark with Riven's patrol route. Riven pretended he did not like that. He asked for one of the covers to be brought to the valley so he could inspect the design. Mogren had it hung over the storehouse within the hour. While Riven grew stronger, the settlement learned to survive without placing every problem under his claws. Mogren divided the goblin adults into work crews instead of relying on whoever happened to be awake. One maintained walls and drainage. One handled food storage. A third rotated through the watchposts, with blue hounds as scent trackers. Tikka became too old to be stopped by simple instructions, and too young to be trusted with anything sharp. Mogren solved this by making her a runner between watchposts. She treated the appointment like a military command. Alden helped design an evacuation plan with 3 routes out of the valley. The main road was fastest. 2 older mining tunnels served as backups. Stores of water, bandages, and dry grain were placed at each exit. Elira established fire breaks on the western and southern slopes. Goblin workers cleared dead brush in strips and dug shallow trenches where controlled backfires could be set if Korvath used flame against the forest. Nixara worked on the ruins. She had made little progress on the 999 doors until Riven crossed level 800. Then, new characters appeared. They were not carved into the stone. They emerged as pale lines whenever Riven stood near the seal. Nixara copied them carefully. One evening, near the end of his 13th month, she asked Riven to come inside. He had become too large for the original chamber, so the goblins had opened an old upper arch that allowed him to lower his head into the ruin from outside. Nixara stood beneath the seal with purple crystal light shining across her silver lilac braid. Elira held several copied pages beside her. The translation was incomplete, but one sentence was clear. The Crown Road opens only to a dragon who reaches the limit of the lower sky. Beneath it, the digits 999 glowed. Riven looked at the doors. Lower sky. Does that mean this world? Nixara said the old language could mean world, realm, or layer of heaven. She disliked all 3 possibilities, because each one created several hundred new questions. Elira pointed to another symbol near the upper edge. It resembled a crown made from 7 horns. Nixara had found the same shape in a damaged draconic genealogy. It referred to something called the Crown Ascension. Riven asked what happened at level 999. Nixara spread her hands. The door opens. That is not what I asked. It is the part the door has chosen to explain. Riven looked at the seal for a long moment. The mystery mattered. Korvath mattered first. Riven told Nixara to keep translating and returned outside. By the 14th month, he reached level 862. High Dragon Stage achieved. The evolution came after he killed a thunder-backed drake that had nested above a mineral spring. The drake itself was a lesser dragonkin, rather than a true dragon, but its core held dense storm mana. He was now long enough that his tail reached across the entire upper yard when he rested beside the cave. His emerald scales had deepened to forest green along the spine, with brighter edges catching the sun. His horns swept behind his skull like polished jade dipped in black. The gold of his eyes had become almost luminous. The transition consumed most of the separate dragon ration reserve Mogren had established after the Meyerhorn evolution. Riven had brought back the drake's carcass and 2 other large kills for meat, while the goblins supplied salt, ground shell, and mineral slurry. Elira measured a sharp dip in the deep mana current during the change, and watched it recover over the next 6 days, instead of assuming the forest could feed infinite growth for free. His aura changed too. Goblins who had lived beside him since hatching barely reacted, but visitors felt it immediately. Young hunters forgot sentences halfway through speaking. Small magical beasts avoided his direct gaze. Riven learned to suppress the pressure around the settlement. He did not want Tikka dropping her breakfast every time he walked past. Korvath noticed the new stage from hundreds of miles away. The red dragon had been watching through reports. Ogres returned from the quarry with one leader missing 3 teeth and refusing to discuss what happened. Mercenaries reported that Grafen's roads stayed open. Merchants who had once avoided the valley now competed for permits because protected caravans suffered fewer losses. The green dragon was not being isolated. He was becoming more useful to his neighbors. Korvath changed plans. He stopped trying to make tribute cheaper than independence. He began preparing to remove the independent dragon entirely. Calling every dragon vassal in his march would have been politically clumsy. A flight of fire-breathing dragons crossing Sylvan airspace would turn a private claim into a regional war, and admitting that one 18-month green dragon required half the Western March would weaken the authority Korvath was trying to protect. He chose deniable human contracts, driven monsters, one-bound siege beast, and his own strength for the final kill. The first sign came from the western sky. Elira spotted 3 ash kites circling beyond the ridge. The birds were small magical scavengers, harmless by themselves, but their migration pattern was wrong. They nested near volcanic territory. Nyxara captured one using a light net spell. A tiny copper ring had been fixed around its leg. The ring carried Korvath's mark and a directional rune. He was mapping the valley's defenses from the air. Alden received another warning from Grafen. Multiple mercenary companies had taken contracts in western towns. The contracts listed monster suppression and road security. The hiring agent was a trade house controlled by one of Korvath's human intermediaries. Mogren's hounds found larger tracks north of the quarry. Something enormous had been moved through the forest under cover of night. Riven gathered the core group in the old storage hall, because it was the only roofed building tall enough for his head to fit through the open wall. Mogren stood over a table covered in wooden markers. Alden represented Grafen. Elira had brought maps of the forest water lines. Nyxara had rune sketches. Tikka had been told to stay outside, and was visibly listening through a crack in the door. Riven could see one of her ears. He ignored it. The problem was clear. Korvath intended a real attack before Riven reached 999. Alden estimated that mercenaries could approach along 2 roads. Elira believed Korvath would use fire from the west, because prevailing winds would push it toward the settlement. Mogren expected monster auxiliaries through the northern woods, where the palisade met steep ground. Nyxara placed a purple marker farther back. The enormous tracks belonged to an ironroot behemoth. She had found references in western bestiaries. The creatures were ancient siege beasts bred centuries ago by dragon cults. Their hides absorbed weak magic. Their skull plates could break stone gates. A mature one could reach the low 900s. The same records describe the cruel safeguard used by dragon wardens. Bound behemoths carried a cinderlock threaded through the core. If the command lattice failed, or the beast died outside its master's control, the lock burned the core into inert slag, so an enemy could not harvest it. Riven looked at the marker. The beast might contain enough energy to matter near the final threshold, but only if they could survive it, and keep Korvath's safeguard from destroying the prize. Mogren asked which threat Riven planned to handle personally. Riven's first answer was, all of them. The room went quiet. He said Riven could kill every mercenary on the roads, but the behemoth would reach the wall while he did it. He could fight Korvath in the sky, but fire crews would still need to protect the houses. He could chase monster raiders through the northern trees, but every minute spent there gave the red dragon freedom elsewhere. Nyxara added that if the behemoth appeared, she would need time, close enough to read its binding, before anyone tried to break the wrong rune and turn the core into a lump of hot glass. Riven disliked every part of that sentence. Riven disliked the argument because it was correct. For most of his life in this world, becoming stronger had solved problems directly. A larger predator appeared. He killed it. A road became dangerous. He flew over it. A wall needed a log moved. He moved the log. The valley had grown beyond a single pair of claws. He looked around the table. Mogren had kept the tribe alive before Riven hatched. Alden managed soldiers and roads professionally. Illyra understood the forest better than anyone present. Nyxara had solved the Guardian's anchors, while Riven kept it occupied. Riven had trusted them during fights already. The difference now was scale. He assigned responsibilities. Alden would control the road defense and civilian evacuation. Mogren would hold the inner settlement and tunnel routes. Illyra would command fire response across the western slope. Nyxara would identify and break whatever runes controlled the behemoth or guided Corvath's auxiliaries. The Blue Hounds would carry messages and scout approaches. Riven would fight the threats. None of them could survive. Mogren listened, then moved the dragon-shaped marker from the center of the table to the western ridge. The Lord hunts the biggest problem. Riven looked at the map. That is the plan. Tikka's voice came through the crack in the door. He assigned responsibilities. Alden would control the protected road, the road wardens, and civilian evacuation. Mogren would hold the inner settlement and tunnel routes. Illyra would command fire response across the western slope. Nyxara would identify and disrupt whatever runes controlled the behemoth or guided Corvath's auxiliaries. The Blue Hounds would carry messages and scout approaches. Riven would fight the threats. None of them could survive. Mogren listened, then moved the dragon-shaped marker from the center of the table to the western ridge. The Lord hunts the biggest problem. Riven looked at the map. That is the plan. Tikka's voice came through the crack in the door. What if there are two biggest problems? Everyone turned toward the wall. The visible ear disappeared. Riven considered the question. Then I kill the first one quickly. Nyxara said that was an offensively dragon-shaped solution. Riven agreed. They spent the next 4 months preparing to make it work. The palisade was reinforced with packed earth instead of simply being raised higher. Alden pointed out that a taller wooden wall would only provide Corvath with more material to burn. Water barrels were buried at regular intervals. Roofs were coated with wet clay. The 2 evacuation tunnels were widened for carts and children. Grayfen moved a reserve of grain to a fortified storehouse 6 miles east, rather than keeping all supplies inside the valley. If the settlement burned, starvation would not finish what the fire started. The elves dug channels from the upper stream to the western slope. Illyra marked sections of forest that could be sacrificed to stop a larger blaze. Nyxara placed detection runes on likely approaches. She also built crude signal crystals linked to 3 watch posts. They could transmit only 1 of 4 colors, but 1 color for fire, 1 for mercenaries, 1 for monsters, and 1 for dragon was enough. Riven trained between hunts. He practiced releasing venom while turning at speed. He learned to compress a cloud on one side with wing pressure, pushing it where he wanted instead of letting the wind decide. He hardened his stomach against rapid changes in altitude by climbing until frost formed on his wing edges and diving back through warm air. During those 4 months, training alone could not move Riven toward the ceiling. He needed high-grade cores, and he took 7 of them from territories strong enough to punish a careless high dragon. An obsidian tusk basilisk in the western ravines pushed him past 900 after he learned to attack around its mirrored gaze instead of through it. 2 cliff wyverns nesting over a hot spring raised him into the 930s. A magma-shelled tortoise and 3 lesser cores carried him to 963. The last major hunt was a frostbine leviathan in a mountain lake. Riven refused to fight it underwater, shattered the ice shelf above its breathing channel, and killed it when it surfaced into the narrow opening. Its core brought him to level 991 3 days before the tribute frost. The 7 hunts consumed more food and mineral mass than his first 600 levels combined. Mogren therefore kept a dragon reserve separate from civilian winter stores. Riven supplied most of it himself, by bringing whole carcasses home, while trade purchased salt and mineral additives. For the final days, Mogren insisted that Riven remain overfed and mineral-loaded, so his body would have material ready if a qualifying core appeared during the siege. The final 8 levels alone demanded more evolutionary energy than his first 600 combined. On the night before Korvath attacked, Riven walked through the settlement. The gatehouse he had once been able to enter now reached only halfway up his foreleg. The original smokehouse still stood near the stream. Mogren had refused to demolish it, even after larger stone stores were built. Riven found Tikka sitting on its roof. She had grown taller. Her auburn hair was tied back now, and a short runner's cloak hung around her shoulders. She was still young enough that Mogren became angry whenever she volunteered for anything dangerous. Riven lowered his head beside the roof. Tikka reached out and touched the white crescent scale on his chest. She remembered when it had been smaller than her palm. Now it was larger than the roof beneath her. She asked whether Korvath was stronger. Riven answered honestly. He has more experience than I do. Tikka frowned. That was not the question. Riven's gold eye focused on her. He said Korvath had been stronger when they first met. Tikka accepted that answer. She handed him a strip of dried meat. Riven recognized the gesture immediately. It was the same kind she had stolen on his 10th day. He took half and pushed the rest back toward her. Tikka grinned. A red signal crystal lit on the western watchtower. A red signal crystal lit on the western watchtower. Then another turned blue on the northern ridge. The alarm bell began to ring. A thin white crust covered the grass. The annual tribute frost had arrived exactly on the date recorded in Korvath's claim. Korvath arrived with it. The first attack came from humans. That was deliberate. Korvath knew Riven would hesitate longer over men in armor than over monsters crashing through the trees. 40 mercenaries advanced on the eastern road before dawn, carrying Grafen-style shields and blue cloaks purchased from old military stores. From a distance, they looked like Alden's road guards. Alden had anticipated that possibility. Every Grafen road warden and volunteer assigned to the protected corridor wore a strip of white cloth around the left forearm. The approaching force had none. He ordered the gate closed. The mercenary captain shouted that he carried emergency orders from Baron Halric. Alden asked him to give the week's challenge phrase. The man answered with last week's phrase. Alden gave one warning. They expected the defenders to meet them at the gate. Instead, the first rank crossed a patch of road that had been cut thin underneath and covered with packed dirt. The surface collapsed beneath their weight. Men fell waist-deep into a trench filled with loose clay. Grafen road wardens and volunteer crossbowmen fired from behind earthen shields. The bolts struck legs and exposed shoulders rather than faces. Alden wanted prisoners if possible. Dead mercenaries could not explain who paid them. The second rank tried to go around the trench. Blue hounds came out of the brush on both sides. They did not leap into the formation. They snapped at ankles, forced men to turn, then disappeared between trees before swords came down. The charge lost shape. Alden led 6 armored road guards through the gate and hit the disorganized flank. The road battle was loud, ugly, and short. Korvath had paid for professionals, but he had paid them to assault a position that had spent 4 months preparing specifically for them. Within minutes, half had surrendered, and the rest were retreating east. Alden did not chase far. His signal crystal had turned green. Monsters were entering from the north. Mogren heard them before the watchpost reported numbers. The trees cracked in sequence. Ogres, horned apes, and 2 plated forest lizards came down the slope in a loose mass. Korvath had not trained them into an army. He had threatened, paid, or driven them toward the valley, and given them one direction to move. That made them dangerous in a different way. They did not care about formation. They cared about getting through the wall. Mogren stood on the northern platform, with his red scarf tied tighter around his neck, and watched the first ogre hit the packed earth reinforcement. The wall held. The second ogre climbed over the first. Mogren raised his staff. Goblin archers fired clay jars. The jars shattered against the slope and released slick rendered fat mixed with ash. The next attackers lost footing. Ogres crashed into one another. A plated lizard slid sideways and blocked half the path. Mogren lowered his staff. Spears came through prepared gaps in the wall. The goblins did not need to kill every attacker. They needed to keep them crowded below the embankment. Tikka ran messages between the northern wall and the inner yard, with a blue hound at her side. She carried colored cords instead of written notes, so even frightened guards could understand them at a glance. Blue meant wounded. Black meant breach. When the first black cord appeared, she sprinted to Mogren instead of the inner yard. A horned ape had climbed a tree beyond the palisade and dropped onto a watch roof. 2 more followed. Mogren left the platform with 4 hunters. By the time he reached the roof, 1 ape had torn through the ladder, and another was trying to lift a section of planking. Mogren jabbed his spear at its face. The ape caught the shaft and pulled. Mogren let go. The sudden lack of resistance sent the creature backward. A goblin behind him dropped a loop of rope over its raised arm. 2 others pulled from the opposite side. The ape lost balance. Mogren picked up a fallen hammer and struck it behind the ear. He was not strong enough to kill the creature with 1 blow. He only needed to make it look at him. The blue hound, beside Tikka, launched from the roof ridge and closed its jaws on the ape's throat. The other 2 apes fled back into the trees. Mogren retrieved his spear. Tikka stared at the broken ladder. Mogren told her to use the stairs on the south side. She pointed out there were no stairs on the south side. Mogren looked at the drop. Then at Tikka. Then at the approaching monsters. He told her to improvise in a way that did not involve dying. Tikka considered this excellent advice and slid down a rain chain. The western slope became Illyria's battlefield. Korvath's Ashkites arrived first, carrying ceramic bulbs in their claws. They dropped the bulbs into dry brush. Each one burst into sticky orange flame. Illyria had expected ordinary fire. Dragon alchemy burned hotter. The first prepared water trench turned to steam. She changed the plan immediately. Rather than wasting water on the center of the blaze, she ordered crews to soak the unburned line ahead of it. Archers shot down Ashkites before they reached deeper trees. Goblins used long hooked poles to pull burning branches into the cleared strip. When the wind shifted, Illyria personally set a controlled fire along the southern edge. The 2 fronts consumed the dry fuel between them and died against blackened ground. Smoke covered the western ridge. That was when Korvath appeared above it. He did not attack the settlement. He circled once, copper eyes searching. Riven was already in the air. The 2 dragons saw each other across the smoke. Korvath turned north. Riven did not follow. That surprised the older dragon. Riven had learned from the hounds on his 10th day. An obvious threat could be bait. The ground shook beneath the valley. Trees toppled on the northern ridge behind the monster assault. Something enormous pushed through them. The iron-root behemoth stood almost as tall as the palisade and twice as long as Riven. Its body looked grown rather than born. Black bark plates overlapped across a frame of iron-colored muscle. 6 legs ended in blunt claws. The skull was a wedge of dark wood and mineral, reinforced by 2 forward horns. Red runes glowed in lines along its flanks. It walked straight toward the inner gate. Nyxara's appraisal crystal flashed purple as she read the binding from the old ruin platform. Approximate level 928. The runes were not a set of weak points like the ancient Guardian's anchors. They formed one command lattice centered on a crown-shaped band beneath the throat, with a second line buried all the way to the core. Nyxara shouted the part that mattered most. If the command lattice broke normally, the buried cinderlock would burn the core into inert slag. Korvath had brought a siege weapon that was designed not to become loot. Tikka's question from the planning room had become literal. There were now 2 threats large enough to require Riven personally. He folded his wings and dropped toward the behemoth. Korvath accelerated after him. Riven had expected that too. He pulled up just before the tree line and released a wide poison cloud behind him. Korvath entered the edge of it and immediately climbed away, unwilling to inhale venom before their real fight began. The delay gave Riven 5 seconds. He used all 5. He struck the behemoth from the side with his full weight. The creature moved half a step. Riven's shoulder rang from the impact. Level 991 strength was enough to overturn houses. The behemoth had been bred to break fortresses. It swung its head. One horn caught Riven beneath the chest and lifted him off the ground. He twisted before the second horn could pin him and raked the creature's face. His claws left shallow grooves. Nothing flowed over the damage. The armor was simply that thick. Nixara's voice reached him through the temporary relay rune. She could interfere with the throat band, but she needed the behemoth's head low and steady for several heartbeats. If she merely shattered the band, the Cinderlock would race inward and ruin the core. She had prepared a counter pattern that could divert the burn into the outer runes, but she could not promise it would hold. Riven told her that he preferred the version where the settlement remained standing, whether the core survived or not. Then the behemoth charged the inner gate. Riven attacked its eyes. A narrow venom stream struck the mineral ridge above the left socket. The behemoth jerked its head away and followed him instead of the gate. Riven flew low toward the northern drainage cut the goblins had widened during the siege preparations. The channel looked like solid packed earth from above. Beneath the surface lay wet clay and loose stone. Riven crossed it on the wing. The behemoth did not. Its front left leg punched through the crust to the knee. The next step collapsed more of the bank. The creature lurched forward, head dropping as it fought for balance. Nixara ran from the trench with 2 goblin sappers and drove her staff into the glowing crown band beneath its throat. Purple light spread through the red command lines. Korvath descended above them with fire already gathering in his mouth. Riven rose to intercept. The flame came before he reached the red dragon. He folded one wing and dropped beneath it. The white-orange edge of the blast crossed the behemoth's exposed shoulder instead. Black bark glowed dull red. The behemoth tore its trapped leg free and swung its horns toward Nixara. Riven hit the side of its skull hard enough to turn the blow away from her. Nixara kept both hands on the staff. The crown band flashed. Every red rune on the behemoth's body went dark for 1 heartbeat, then came back in a violent orange red. "The steering command is gone," she shouted. "The Cinderlock is burning inward." Freedom did not make the behemoth friendly. It reared, throwing dirt and broken stone over the trench, and slammed both front feet into the ground. The shock knocked goblins from the nearby wall. One horn swept through the outer palisade and tore open a gap wide enough for a cart. Nixara dragged her staff free. Her counter pattern had diverted part of the cinder burn into the outer rune lines, but not all of it. Orange light was already crawling beneath the bark toward the center of the beast. She estimated they had less than 2 minutes before the core vitrified. Riven did not answer. He was already climbing onto the creature's back. He fired concentrated venom into the same shoulder section Korvath's flame had heated. The sudden chemical chill and corrosive magic bit into the mineral bark. A web of cracks spread across the plate. The behemoth bucked. Riven dug in with all 4 claws. Korvath dove again, this time aiming for Riven rather than the settlement. Riven saw the shadow move across the cracked armor and stayed where he was until the last instant. Korvath's foreclaw struck the weakened plate with the full weight of the dive. The plate tore free. For one brief instant, both dragons stared at the opening Korvath had created. Riven almost laughed. Korvath roared and tried to pull away. Riven plunged his foreclaws into the opening. The behemoth twisted hard enough to throw him into the air. He kept one claw hooked inside and ripped through ironroot fibers while orange cinderlight crept deeper around his arm. The core was not a neat exposed crystal. It was a dense mineral heart, wrapped in root muscle and threaded with the burning safeguard. Riven tore out a bundle of glowing fibers to open the cavity, then kicked away before one of the behemoth's rear spikes could catch his belly. The creature turned from the settlement and came after him. The steering rune was dead. Now it was simply furious. Korvath hovered farther off, unwilling to help by accident a second time. The behemoth's control was gone, and its left shoulder armor hung open. It was still approximately level 928, and strong enough to crush the inner gate if it turned back. Riven was level 991. Now strength could matter. He drove it away from the wall with repeated attacks on the open shoulder. The behemoth tried to gore him. Riven climbed over the horns, came down behind them, and buried both rear claws in exposed tissue. Riven beat his wings, lifted clear, and hit the same wound again. His jaws closed around a thick iron root bundle. He tore it free. Dark mana sprayed across his face. The orange cinder light inside the cavity had almost reached the core. Riven shoved one foreleg into the cavity, up to the elbow, and felt for the hard pulse beneath the burning fibers. A spike punched through the side of his foreleg. He snarled and pushed deeper. His claws found crystal. The cinder lock flared against it. Riven closed his grip and broke the core before the safeguard could finish turning it to slag. The behemoth collapsed so suddenly that he nearly went down beneath it. He dragged himself clear and tore the largest unburned fragment from the cavity. Blood ran from the puncture in his foreleg. One wing edge was scorched. His lungs felt raw from venom use. Corvath was already descending toward the field. The core fragments still burned with dense evolutionary energy and carried more than mana. Iron root crystal was saturated with mineral salts, carbon-rich fibers, and condensed earth essence. Riven had also spent the previous days eating from the separate dragon reserve, until Mogren complained that one more carcass would require building a fourth smokehouse. His body had the matter it needed if the final stage became available. He swallowed the fragment. Evolutionary energy acquired. 100-fold evolution applied. Natural ceiling reached. Level increased to 999. Dragon Lord stage achieved. The transformation did not take the better part of an hour like his adult stage. The last transition struck through a body already prepared for it in 3 violent heartbeats. Mana burst outward from Riven hard enough to flatten grass and force Corvath to flare his wings before he could cross the ruined field. Riven's wounds heated. His body grew, but the change was more than size. Each emerald scale tightened into a harder, smoother pattern. The dark ridge along his spine deepened. His black-tipped horns lengthened behind his skull. Muscles settled around his chest and wings, with dense balance instead of simple bulk. The burned wing membrane repaired as the stage transition drew on stored protein and mineral mass to rebuild what belonged to the evolved body. His gold eyes brightened. The living mana of the valley became suddenly clear. Riven could feel roots drinking water below the hill. He could sense Elira's magic burning along the western firebreak. He could distinguish every blue hound moving through the northern trees by the faint spark of mana in its body. His venom reservoir expanded and stabilized. The broad cloud he had practiced for months no longer spilled unevenly from his jaws. He could feel its pressure before release and shape the flow with breath and wing movement. Nothing foreign entered him. Everything he had already possessed had reached its lower world limit. Corvath landed across the ruined field. For the first time since the red dragon arrived, the pressure between them felt equal. Then Riven's aura continued rising. Corvath's copper eyes narrowed. "You were 600 when I first came here." Riven stepped over the behemoth's broken horn. "The compact gave me time. You spent it sending ogres and cutting bridges." Corvath looked at the settlement behind him. The mercenary attack had failed. The northern monsters were breaking against the inner defense. The western fire was being contained. His siege beast was dead, and the cinder lock had failed to deny Riven its core. He still had one path to victory. Corvath's last path to victory was to kill the dragon everything else depended on. He launched. Riven met him in the air. Their first collision cracked like thunder. Corvath hooked one foreclaw around Riven's shoulder and drove the other toward his throat. Riven twisted his neck aside, caught the wrist between his jaws, and bit. Corvath's scales resisted. Riven's level 999 teeth punched through the edge of one plate. Corvath slammed his forehead into Riven's skull. Riven released him. Both dragons separated. Korvath breathed fire immediately. Riven had expected the follow-up. He rolled beneath the first stream and climbed along its edge, using the hot rising air to gain height. Korvath turned inside him. Korvath's experience showed immediately. The older dragon had anticipated the thermal climb. His tail struck Riven across the ribs. The blow sent him sideways. Korvath followed with claws. Riven folded one wing and dropped before the strike connected. He opened his jaws during the fall. A narrow venom stream hit Korvath across the chest. The red scales smoked. Korvath roared and answered with flame. Riven moved behind a column of smoke from the western slope. Fire passed through it. For several minutes, the fight belonged to Korvath's experience. He did not waste attacks. He used the sun behind his body during dives. He forced Riven toward open sky, where the green dragon could not use trees or cliffs to break pursuit. He changed rhythm constantly, sometimes striking twice with claws, sometimes abandoning the second attack for a tail sweep. Riven took a cut across the neck and another along his left flank. Neither wound was deep, but both cost him movement. He stopped trying to win each exchange and started collecting information from them instead. Korvath preferred to turn left after breathing fire because his old right shoulder scar limited the first extension of that wing. The delay was tiny. Riven would never have noticed it before training against the Stormrock. Korvath also closed his inner eyelids whenever green venom passed near his face. That reaction lasted less than a heartbeat. It was enough to hide movement. Riven released a broad poison cloud. Korvath climbed above it. Riven did not follow. He spread the cloud wider with 2 hard wing beats, turning a patch of open sky into a green veil. Korvath circled around. Riven released another cloud below and to the right, then a third near the smoke column. The poison was not concentrated enough to kill Korvath quickly. It changed the available airspace. The red dragon could pass through it, but doing so meant closing his inner eyelids and holding his breath. He could burn a path, but breathing fire required inhaling immediately afterward. Riven was shaping the battlefield the same way he had driven the Mirehorn Titan from its marsh. Korvath understood. He stopped circling and charged directly. That was what Riven wanted. The red dragon came through the narrow, clear lane between 2 poison clouds. Riven met him head-on. Korvath expected another last-second dodge. Riven did not dodge. He took the first claw across the shoulder. Pain tore through muscle. He used the contact to get inside Korvath's reach. His jaws closed on the old scar at the red dragon's right shoulder. Korvath roared and rolled. Riven held on as sky, forest, and smoke spun around them in a violent circle. Korvath struck Riven's side with a rear claw. One scale broke. Blood ran warm along Riven's belly. Riven released his bite and kicked away. The right shoulder wound had opened. Korvath's wing beat lost a fraction of power. The older dragon saw Riven notice. He immediately changed strategy. Korvath climbed high, higher than the poison clouds, and began drawing mana into his chest. The glow between his scales brightened from orange to white. Elira saw it from the ground and shouted through Nixara's relay. This was not an ordinary breath. Korvath intended to burn the whole Central Valley in one pass. If Riven pursued directly, Korvath could release the attack into him. If he stayed away, the settlement would take it. Riven accelerated upward. Korvath's mouth opened. Riven fired venom first. Riven did not aim at Korvath's body. He aimed at the damaged right wing. The narrow stream hit the membrane near the old shoulder scar. Korvath jerked sideways, his gathered flame released early. A white-orange column tore across the sky instead of downward. The heat still scorched the tops of trees, but the settlement escaped the center of it. Riven crossed the remaining distance, while Korvath's lungs were empty. He struck from the red dragon's right side. Korvath tried to turn left, his usual recovery. Riven had expected that. He went lower, caught the damaged wing near the base, and drove both rear claws into Korvath's flank. The red dragon bit at his neck. Riven released before the jaws closed. He dropped beneath Corvath, then beat upward into the weakened side. The damaged wing folded. Corvath lost altitude. He recovered once. Riven hit him again. They fell toward the western ridge. Corvath used his tail to knock Riven away and managed to level out a few dozen feet above the trees. He was still dangerous. He was also breathing hard. The open shoulder wound smoked green at the edges. Riven hovered across from him. Corvath looked toward the west. For a moment, Riven thought he might retreat. The old dragon's eyes moved to the broken siege beast, the defended walls, and the valley that had refused him. Corvath looked west again. Open sky lay beyond the ridge, and for several seconds, he had room to leave. His claws flexed against the air. Then he folded one wing and turned back toward Riven. He came low over the trees, using trunks to hide his approach from Riven's direct view. Riven no longer relied on sight alone. At level 999, the living mana beneath him traced Corvath's movement through every branch he disturbed and every animal that fled. Riven waited above the ridge. Corvath burst from the canopy. Riven dropped behind him. The red dragon tried to turn. The right wing failed to give him enough lift. Riven's concentrated venom struck the joint at point-blank range. Corvath's wing collapsed. He hit the slope chest first and carved a trench through black soil. Riven landed before he could rise. Corvath swung one claw. Riven caught the wrist and forced it down. The red dragon tried to breathe fire. Riven drove his other foreclaw against Corvath's jaw and pinned it shut. Heat leaked between the teeth. Corvath's tail struck Riven once across the back. Riven held position. He could feel the difference now. Corvath still had more experience. Riven had reached a level of raw physical power the older dragon could no longer overcome while injured. Corvath knew it too. His copper eye fixed on Riven. 18 months. Riven's claws tightened. You should have taken the salt deal. For the first time, Corvath looked confused. Riven bit through the wounded shoulder and into the core channel beneath. The red dragon's body went rigid. Riven released a concentrated burst of venom directly into the exposed mana path. Corvath's fire guttered in his throat. His claws tore at the earth once. Then the massive body settled. Riven stood above him for several seconds, listening until he was certain the red dragon would not rise again. Corvath's death produced evolutionary energy, yet level 999 remained fixed. Riven's race and existing abilities stayed unchanged. The result confirmed that he had reached the natural ceiling promised by the lower world, and that whatever came next would require a source of growth that did not exist here. He turned toward the valley. The northern attackers had begun to flee after sensing Corvath's death. Mogren's defenders did not chase far. Alden had captured most of the surviving mercenaries. Elira's fire lines were holding. Nixara sat beside the broken outer trench with soot across her face and one sleeve torn, arguing with a goblin medic who wanted her to lie down. The settlement still stood. Riven took off slowly because his shoulder hurt. When his shadow crossed the palisade, every face below turned upward. Tikka ran into the center of the yard. She looked behind him for the red dragon. Riven landed. He lowered Corvath's black horn, broken from the body during the final fall, onto the ground in front of Mogren. The goblin elder stared at the horn. Then he looked up at Riven. The cheer began with one voice. It spread through the yard, over the wall, and into the road where Grayfen road wardens were binding prisoners. Riven let them shout. He was too tired to pretend he disliked it. The price of the siege became clear over the next hours. 7 defenders had serious injuries. 2 goblin hunters had broken limbs, and 1 would walk with a damaged knee even after the bone healed. 1 Grayfen road warden had a spear wound through the thigh. 3 homes near the northern wall were destroyed. The western barley and turnip terraces were blackened by fire. Half the outer palisade needed rebuilding. Most of the medicinal resin reserve had been used on burns, and a quarter of Riven's stored meat had spoiled when the western smokehouse roof collapsed. No child had been lost. The evacuation tunnels had worked. The grain reserve outside the valley was untouched. The main cistern still held water. Riven considered those facts more important than the size of the hole in his wall. He spent the night beside the damaged gate instead of returning to the cave. His own cuts were closing under dragon regeneration, slower now that the stage evolution had ended. Mogren brought him a bucket of water and complained that the victory horn was too heavy to move without 4 people. Riven told him to leave it where it was. Mogren asked whether that meant it was part of the horde. Riven said the horn was evidence. Mogren nodded with insulting seriousness. Of course, evidence. Riven flicked one claw and sent a pebble bouncing off the goblin's staff. Mogren walked away laughing. Rebuilding began the next morning. That decision surprised several Greifen road officers who expected a week of celebration after killing Korvath. Riven had no objection to celebration. He objected to celebrating beside a wall large enough for an ogre to walk through. Mogren agreed. By sunrise, repair crews were clearing burned timber. Greifen engineers attached to the protected road treaty helped brace the northern embankment. Elira led teams through the western forest to extinguish roots still smoldering underground. Nyxara recovered the surviving command crystals from the iron root behemoth and locked them in a stone box after Riven asked 3 times whether they could activate anything else. She said probably not. Riven had learned to distrust the word probably when spoken by scholars near ancient machinery. Korvath's death changed politics faster than construction. 2 lesser dragons in the western marches stopped sending tribute while they waited to see who would claim authority next. Work at one of Korvath's cliff mines halted when overseers fled west, and 3 trade houses suspended contracts, rather than guess which seals were still valid. None of those holdings automatically became Riven's. He had killed a warden, not inherited every road and mine that warden had bullied. The first formal messenger to Emerald Haven arrived from Greifen on the 4th day. Baron Helric recognized the valley as an independent draconic territory under the existing road agreement. Greifen wanted no share of Riven's internal rule. In return, the barony requested that the protected trade corridor remain open, and that hostile magical migrations still be reported. Riven accepted. The Sylvan Accord sent its decision 2 days later. The elves recognized Riven as guardian of the central Old Forest, so long as the agreed boundary and mana protections remained in force. Reports from farther west remained unsettled, which was exactly where Riven preferred to leave them, until his own walls were repaired. Elira read the declaration aloud beside the gate. When she reached the title Emerald Lord, Mogren interrupted and informed her that the official title was much longer. Elira asked how much longer. Mogren took a breath. Riven put one claw over the goblin elder's staff. Emerald Lord is acceptable. Mogren looked betrayed. Tikka whispered that the full version would still be used for festivals. Riven heard her. He chose not to begin another battle he could not win. The valley needed a name for maps as well. Humans had been calling it Dragon Valley. Elves used an older word meaning Green Hollow. The goblins preferred Sacred Domain of the ancient Emerald Lord, beyond the measure of years, and protector of properly salted meat. Riven suspected Mogren had added the final phrase after the treaty negotiation. Alden proposed Emerald Haven. The name was short, accurate, and unlikely to require a second page on official documents. Riven approved it. Within 2 weeks, a wooden sign stood beside the rebuilt gate. Emerald Haven. Below it, someone had carved a much smaller line. Home of the Emerald Lord. Riven looked at Mogren. Mogren pointed at Tikka. Tikka pointed at Nyxara. Nyxara pointed at Elira with complete confidence. Elira stared at all 3 of them and said she regretted defending the settlement. The sign stayed. Life settled into a new shape. Merchants returned first because merchants had a remarkable ability to recover from fear when roads became profitable again. The first caravan after the siege brought iron nails, 2 barrels of lamp oil, winter cloth, and 12 sacks of salt at the fixed Greifen bulk rate of 5 copper marks each. Riven personally checked the figure. Alden witnessed this and informed him that he had now defeated a dragon lord and still inspected salt like a suspicious quartermaster. Riven answered that victory did not improve arithmetic, The trade route reopened fully before the end of the month. Goblin smoked meat reached Greyfen markets. Elven medicine passed through the valley under agreed tariffs. Human tools came the other direction. Riven took no arbitrary third from any cart. Emerald Haven charged a small road fee used for bridge maintenance, patrol food, and repair of the watch stations. Mogren kept 2 sets of accounts on slate and paper. The settlement treasury paid for grain, repairs, road patrols, tools, and shared stores. Riven's personal hoard covered whatever he chose to buy for himself, and received only the share they had agreed belonged to him, from his own kills and property. Riven checked both ledgers often enough that the Goblin Elder eventually placed an empty line at the bottom of the personal account labeled Dragon Suspicion Reserve. Riven asked what it meant. Mogren said it was a place to record any coin Riven imagined had vanished. Riven threatened to reduce his salary. Mogren reminded him he did not receive one. Riven stared at the ledger for a long time. The governance of Emerald Haven had developed loopholes alarmingly quickly. The blue hounds became a normal sight around the outer watch posts. The silver-backed female still refused to enter the center of the settlement, but 2 of her grown pups slept beside the north gate and accepted scraps from guards. Tika trained one to carry a small message tube on its collar. Alden objected when she began calling herself Chief Skyless Dragon Messenger. Tika pointed out that nobody else had the title. Alden could not argue with the logic. Elira's emergency mandate through the Tribute Frost ended once the Accord accepted the new boundary. She returned to the Sylvan Accord for exactly 9 days, then came back with a permanent liaison seal and 3 boxes of field notes she claimed could not be entrusted to anyone else. She sent letters to Velis requesting more books, 2 assistants, and a specific brand of purple ink that Riven was forbidden to stand near. Riven respected the restriction. Most of the time, his own routine changed after level 999. He continued hunting because a dragon still needed food, but ordinary cores no longer increased his level. The system remained silent when he consumed them. His body had reached the natural ceiling described by the old gate. That did not make practice useless. Riven could still refine movement, improve judgment, and learn to use existing strength better. Korvath had taught him the value of that lesson across several painful scales. He trained above the broken peaks twice each week. He also spent more time in the settlement. At level 999, his presence no longer fit comfortably inside it. Paths had to curve around the places where he rested. The central yard was enlarged so he could land without sending roof tiles into neighboring houses. A shallow stone basin beside the cave became his drinking pool. The original cave entrance, widened so many times by goblin builders, was finally retired. Mogren placed a plaque beside it. First Gate of the Emerald Lord. Riven discovered a second line in smaller letters. Rebuilt 4 times due to uncooperative growth. He considered removing it. Then he remembered the first time he had been stuck in that doorway while 3 terrified builders waited for judgment. He left the plaque where it was. 3 weeks after the siege, Nixara came to find him before dawn, with her side braid half undone, 1 boot unlaced, and a sheet of rune paper crushed tightly in both hands. She had clearly run from the ruins without stopping to fix any of it. Riven followed her into the old nest. He had deliberately stayed away from the sealed doors while Emerald Haven recovered. So this was the first time his level 999 aura had approached them since the battle. Pale green light traced every ancient symbol from floor to arch. The 7-horned crown mark above the door had become visible in full. Nixara had also discovered the same mark inside a fragment of Korvath's broken horn, grown directly into the mana channel rather than carved on the surface. It proved that Korvath had been linked to whoever ruled beyond the Crown Road. Riven lowered his head toward the seal. The system responded. Level 999 confirmed. Lower sky limit reached. Crown Road access granted. The stone doors moved. Dust fell from joints that had not opened in an age. A narrow line appeared between them, bright enough to turn the whole chamber white. As the line widened, the gateway did something the stone arch could not. Its luminous boundary unfolded outward through the open upper ruin and expanded into a vertical oval of distorted air, large enough for Riven's full body. The old masonry was only the anchor. The passage itself was not limited by the size of the doorway. Beyond the light, another sky opened over enormous floating continents. Clouds flowed far below them. Waterfalls poured from their edges and vanished into silver mist. Mountain chains hung in the distance, without any ground beneath them. Vast structures of black stone and gold metal rose from the nearest island. Then something flew past. Riven's breath caught. It was a dragon. Its body was larger than Korvath's by several times. Another followed. Then 3 more crossed between the floating mountains, each carrying an aura dense enough that Riven could feel it through the gate. Nyxara gripped her staff in both hands and stepped so close to the expanded gateway that Elira caught the back of her plum-colored coat and pulled her 1 pace away from the boundary. Nyxara let herself be pulled back without taking her violet eyes off the nearest flying dragon. Alden came last, still fastening his blue cloak. He looked through the opening. Please tell me that is an illusion. Nyxara checked the pressure reading on her staff twice before answering that the mana was very real. Riven studied the nearest island. At its center stood a monument shaped like 7 interlocking horns, the crown ascension symbol. The gate had not led to the next kingdom. It had led to a higher dragon realm. A pulse traveled through the doorway. Far beyond the nearest islands, inside a fortress built into a mountain of black glass, a colossal dragon lifted his head. His scales were so dark red they looked almost black. A crown of obsidian horns framed his skull. Molten gold eyes opened one after the other as old protective runes carried a message into the chamber. Korvath's march seal had gone dark. A new crown road had opened from the lower sky. The ancient dragon touched the message with 1 claw. An image formed above it, carrying the identity registered by the awakened crown road. An emerald dragon with gold eyes and a white crescent scale on his chest stood at the other side of the gate. The ancient dragon watched the image for a long time before speaking the name the road had delivered with it. Back in Emerald Haven, Riven did not hear him. He was busy making a decision. Nyxara wanted to cross immediately. That was obvious from the way she had already packed 3 notebooks into her coat. Elira wanted to know whether the open gate would change the forest's mana balance. Alden wanted someone to explain how a door inside his neighboring territory now opened into a realm populated by dragons larger than fortresses. Riven wanted answers too. He looked back through the ruined chamber toward daylight. Beyond the cave stood the rebuilt wall. Smoke rose from breakfast fires. Goblin workers were already arguing about a roof beam. A blue hound barked at a cart near the gate. Tikka's voice carried from somewhere she had probably been told not to climb. This was what he had built in 18 months. He would not abandon it because a mysterious door had finally become interesting. Riven told Nyxara to unpack the notebooks. Nyxara looked wounded when Riven told her to unpack the notebooks. He would cross the Crown Road after Emerald Haven had a stable winter reserve. After the western wall was finished, and after Alden's road patrol agreement no longer depended on Riven appearing overhead twice a week. The expanded gateway had remained stable since opening, and Nyxara's measurements showed no sign that it would collapse in the next few hours. That removed the only reason to rush. The higher realm had existed for ages. It could wait a few more weeks. Nyxara argued that ancient knowledge might not appreciate being kept waiting. Riven replied that ancient knowledge had kept him waiting 18 months. Fairness required balance. Alden laughed. Elira began taking mana measurements around the doorway. Nyxara reluctantly removed the notebooks from her coat. Riven remained before the open Crown Road. When he had hatched, the chamber behind him had been larger than his entire world. A cave beetle had been a serious enemy. His own wings had thrown him into a wall. His first roar had sounded like a squeaking hinge. Now the old chamber could barely contain his head and shoulders. His level had reached 999. Korvath was dead. Emerald Haven stood under its own treaties, defended by people who had chosen to remain there. The first part of Riven's life as a dragon had reached its limit. Beyond the gate, a dragon larger than a castle crossed between floating continents. Riven's gold eyes followed it. Hundredfold evolution had carried him from a hatchling to the peak of the lower sky in 18 months. The Crown Road had just shown him that the peak was only the floor of somewhere larger. Riven smiled, closed his wings against his sides, and turned toward breakfast. Breakfast came first. After that, Riven had a western wall to finish, a winter reserve to inspect, and a higher world waiting beyond the Crown Road.